This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now by Stefan Kyriasis to give us the latest on everything theatre.
So, yeah, we're going in first with Starlight Express, which is back. It's not in the West End. It's out at Wembley at the Troubadour Theatre, which is a big, almost kind of warehouse space, which suits because, as you know, have you seen the show?
Starlight Express was my first ever musical. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I only saw it once, but I remember it being magical.
Well, this one is 1984 it started, and it's still running in Bochum in Germany in a huge arena. So basically what we've got, they've slightly tweaked it, and there's a little boy or little girl, depending on the cast, going to bed, obsessed with toy trains and dreaming of trains. Everybody is dressed up. To me, it looks like a cross between Tron and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I don't really think any of them look remotely like a train, but hey, the songs are Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's pop mixed with kind of cod 1950s rock and roll, some power ballads. The lyrics are politely like something out of an old speak and spell machine or something, you know. He's a steam train, they're out of date, he's being bullied by the diesel and the electric, and he falls for this carriage, the first-class carriage, new girl Pearl, and he wants to impress us, who enters a race, and that's pretty much it. And when the races happen, all these barriers come up around where we're sitting, the lights are flashing, the music's thumping. It's utterly ridiculous, and I felt like a kind of teenager that was huffing sherbet dib-dabs off a giant block of sugar. It's so much fun, and the really crucial thing about it all is that somehow, in the middle of all of that, I just felt myself getting into the story. And when Pearl and Rusty have their little duet, I was very moved, and there's this big starlight sequence, which is the inspiration, the magical starlight that he's seeking. It's beautiful.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Very good morning to you. It's 9:30 on Wednesday, 17th of July. Live across the United Kingdom, this is Britain's Newsroom with me, Ben Leo, in for Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, good morning. It is a day of huge political significance. After 14 years in the wilderness, Labour are setting out how they're going to change your life with a promise to take the brakes off Britain. Housing, education, energy, health. What exactly are they planning?
And elsewhere, Labour's housing plan. Sir Keir Starmer will pledge to tear up planning restrictions to build 1.5 million new homes across the country. How will the NIMBYs, me included, react?
We've got an overcrowded prison crisis. Plans are afoot to fast-track removal of foreign criminals. They're being reviewed by ministers. These inmates make up 12% of the prison population and cost the taxpayer £47,000 each to accommodate.
And stateside, more supports for Donald Trump. Friends and foes of the former president have endorsed him overnight at the Republican National Convention. And that comes as former PM Boris Johnson urges him not to forget Ukraine after appointing running mate J.D. Vance.
And does it take three to tango? Well, contestants who appear on BBC's Strictly Come Dancing are going to be given chaperones after complaints about the behaviour of two former professional dancers.
And it's a massive day, of course. It's the King's speech amidst the pomp and ceremony. King Charles in his carriage with his headgear on and all the robes and so on. It's a key political day as well because the Labour government are going to be setting out in these 35 bills their plans for the country, not least, Bev, votes for 16-year-olds.
And the housing issue, the building issue. We're going to have Pat McFadden on the show this morning to explain what it might mean for you. Are you worried about it? Are you going to have a huge housing estate or some sort of massive industrial warehouse in your field behind your house? gbnews.com/your say. First, though, the very latest news with Sam Francis.
A very good morning to you from the newsroom. It's just after 9:30, and as we heard there, the top story this morning, there will be pomp and ceremony as the King's speech is delivered later, setting out the new government's priorities. It's the second time King Charles has addressed Parliament during his reign. The speech is expected to contain more than 35 bills, with the Prime Minister saying he wants to take the brakes off Britain. The focus will be creating jobs, building houses and improving transport, with Downing Street already confirming there will be legislation to start bringing railways back into public ownership. It's also expected to address a ban on zero-hours contracts and giving employees the right to switch off from work outside of office hours. Well, former Black Rod David Leakey says the ceremony is steeped in tradition.
Everybody thinks, my goodness, this is archaic. How the heck do we have a system where one of our houses in the Houses of Parliament have lords wearing red robes? Well, they wear their red robes for 1 hour every year. Rather like going to somebody's wedding or baptism or birthday party and you get dressed in your glad rags, the peers wear their glad rags just once a year when the King comes to Parliament for the King's speech.
The latest figures show inflation held at the Bank of England's 2% target last month. All eyes will now be on the central bank and whether it will cut the interest rate this summer. The government says the data is welcome news, but prices, they say, are still high because of the economic chaos inherited from the Conservatives. Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Chris Philps, accused Labour of shameless spin and suggested the party will introduce what he's calling sneaky tax rises.
This stuff that Rachel Reeves has been saying, claiming that the fiscal position is worse than she expected, is obvious nonsense. The OBR obviously assessed our fiscal position. They published their own forecasts a few months ago that she obviously saw. And we've seen today's inflation figure staying down at 2%, on target, lower than the Eurozone, lower than the USA, growth top of the G7.
And Dame Priti Patel is entering the Conservative leadership race, according to The Telegraph. The former Home Secretary is reportedly assembling a campaign team funded by high-profile Tory donors. The 52-year-old is expected to make a formal announcement by the end of next week. It's the first time she's running for leadership after being urged by fellow MPs to join the race. So far, no other candidates have officially declared their plans. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. More throughout the morning.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good morning. It's 9:35. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, live across the United Kingdom with me, Bev Turner, and Ben Leo, while Andrew Pearce is on his holidays.
Very good morning to you. Hope you're doing well. Now, the Prime Minister says he will, quote, take the brakes off Britain by tearing up planning restrictions to build 1.5 million new homes. Now, yesterday, not sure if you saw, Bev, I caused a bit of a stir. I tweeted this. I said, let me just get the tweet up, why I'm a NIMBY. Exhibit A. Cheap, characterless houses in Toy Town estates made of MDF. Is this the best we can do? And Labour want to bulldoze the countryside for these monstrosities, accompanied by, if you're listening on radio, pictures of I must say, a very lacklustre, horrible-looking new-build housing estate that's being erected near my home in West Sussex. To be fair, the majority of people agreed with me. 2,000 likes, 600 comments. There were a few comments, though, which said, a home is a home. Just be grateful. We need more houses. And my response to that, Bev, is what's happened to the aspiration of our nation? Are we happy with any old tap? Cheap developers whacking up these homes made of cardboard. I've slept in a few new builds. If you're sleeping upstairs, you can hear a conversation in the kitchen downstairs. There's no greenery, no provisions for parking, and a lot of the time, no local schools, no decent roads surrounding the area, no GPs, hospitals. Is this the best we can do?
No.
Do we want to see our countryside bulldozed to the ground in replacement of these things?
The thing is, I have to admit, I've got a dog in this fight, right? My other half works for a company that builds eco-friendly houses, like the most green, positive houses in the country. And although sometimes we're a little bit eye-rolly about the eco-zealotry, one thing I absolutely am on board with, and not because I've got a vested interest, is that we need to be building amazingly insulated homes so that people can reduce their bills and they can look nice as well. So they shouldn't be brick built. That's just so old school to be building houses with bricks now. They need great insulation. They need solar panels on the roof so that you can generate your own electricity and even give it back to the grid. You could maybe have an air source heat pump. All this stuff that is really, really expensive to retrofit on old-fashioned brick houses. You should be having them as standard in all houses. And I didn't really know much about this, as I say, until I went to visit the houses that my other half builds. And then I was like, yes, this is the future. These monstrosities they are not the future. But apparently it's to do with who's funding the political parties, partly.
Well, some people attacked me for that tweet. They said I would be grateful for a home like that. My response is, look, I'm sticking up for you. You were being ripped off paying £400,000, £300,000, £500,000, £600,000 for these houses by developers who are making massive amounts of profit for houses that probably cost them a couple of quid to put up.
Yeah, with no imagination about the community as well. There should be shared green spaces. There should be off-street parking, because I still like a car. You know, I know that's a bit old-fashioned. But there should be ways of making these communities beautiful and self-sufficient, so you're not always reliant on a French-owned energy company to provide you with your gas and electricity.
And do you know what? If they built houses akin to, say, the King's amazing project in Poundbury, beautiful new buildings with character, with class, if they built these new builds akin to that, or at least with a bit of flair and pride in what they were doing, people like me wouldn't care so much with these new build estates going up on bits of Greenland and the countryside. But when you're putting up absolute monstrosities like that, no thank you.
Massive day today. All of the politics that Labour have been talking about for at least the last, well, I'm going to say 14 years, but at least the last year, and particularly that 6 weeks running up to the election, they're going to lay it all out for us today, and you're going to find out how it's going to affect your life. We're going to have the pomp and ceremony of the event. They're going to outline their political agenda, and it's just 2 weeks, of course, after coming to power.
Yeah, more than 35 bills are expected to be unveiled during the event. Constitutional expert Dr. Craig Prescott joins us now to break down exactly what happens today, step by step. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Now, look, I guess it's a day of two halves. You've got the royal aspects, the pomp and ceremony, and, you know, the very bizarre rituals, including holding an MP hostage. Maybe you can explain what that's about. But also the legislative aspect of it and Labour's plans for the future. First of all, can we touch, please, on the royal aspect and the ceremony? Why do we do this still?
Yes, good morning. It's good to join you. Primarily, the royal aspects reflect that the King is part of Parliament just as much as the Commons and the Lords. And the importance of today is that this is the only occasion in which all three parts of Parliament meet. The King enters the House of Lords and then requests the attendance of the House of Commons. And so, you know, this is the only occasion when all three parts of Parliament meet, and it is when the King outlines the legislative agenda of his government. You know, it is His Majesty's government, and today is where we very much see the His Majesty part of that term.
Rather unique across the world, do you think, Dr. Prescott, in how we open our Parliament in this way?
Yes, it's something that you know, is derived from the 14th century or so, and has been amended over the centuries. And you know, it reflects that the UK doesn't have a codified constitution, that it hasn't had that constitutional moment where much of this is modernised and put on a more contemporary footing. And it reflects that we have a historical constitution that has adapted and changed over the centuries. The only parallels are those countries that were former members of the British Empire, where they have their own equivalent of this. So, you know, this sort of ceremony today has been exported around the world, you know, with Britain's colonial past.
Dr. Craig, do you think, or ever get the feeling that everything that's great about this country, ceremonies such as this, I mean, some people like Jeremy Corbyn, he called it nonsense, but this is what makes us great and unique and iconic across the world and admired by many. Do you ever get the feeling that there is an agenda at play to kind of erode away at this kind of thing?
There's always been discussions of this nature. Indeed, for several years of her reign, Queen Victoria didn't attend Parliament herself. The ceremony was adapted. So there has always been these discussions, but ultimately they haven't really got anywhere. We've continued with ceremonies like this because, as you say, it is something that the state takes very seriously. It's something the parliamentary authorities take seriously. And, you know, it does provide those iconic images that go around the world. You know, I've had interest from America, Australia, and South Africa sort of over the past few days to, you know, explain just what's going to happen today. And, you know, that is you know, a big benefit of it, that it does attract interest around the world and adds to that idea of soft power that Britain has and excels at.
Just to elaborate for us, if you would, what Ben alluded to about an MP being taken hostage. What happens, Craig?
So essentially this is to ensure the safe return of the monarch from Parliament. So essentially one of the government whips, I think it's Samantha Dixon, if my memory's right, she will go to Buckingham Palace and will essentially watch the ceremony there. And only when the King returns to Buckingham Palace will Samantha Dixon be released and able to go and attend the Commons later this afternoon. I think in principle she'll sit and watch the ceremony and maybe have a glass of dry sherry or something.
Oh, nice. Well, we'll be watching the ceremony, but we won't be doing that, unfortunately.
Can we not organise a sherry or a whiskey behind the scenes?
Do we know how that MP is selected, Craig? She's the MP, Labour MP for Chester North and Neston. How did she get selected? Do we know?
Yes, she's one of the government whips. She was appointed as part of Starmer's formation of his government, and, it's always one of the government whips that take on this role.
OK, Dr Craig Prescott, thanks for joining us this morning. Very much appreciate it. I just want to play you, Bev, this clip. I was talking about the erosion of our national identity and everything that makes us unique. Do you remember this clip from the state? Well, it was when the MPs were getting served in, taking
signed in.
It was Clive Lewis MP, the Labour MP, who decided to have a little twist. This is what he did.
I take this oath under protest and in the hope that one day my fellow citizens will democratically decide to live in a republic. Until that time, I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles according to law.
Well, he got a lot of stick for that, for trying to be a smart aleck, and now, after a complaint from a royalist group, he has now been forced to retake the oath and do it properly.
Oh, please. That's ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah, of course it is. I absolutely defend his right to stand there and say that.
Well, why be an MP and work in Parliament if you want a republic?
Why be an MP if you don't have an opinion on things you feel really strongly about?
At least it's manners, it's decorum. You're in the Houses of Parliament, there's tradition, there's ways of doing things. And actually, Labour talk about the grown-ups being back in the room. I mean, come on. That was juvenile in the extreme.
No, I thought he did what he had to do while staying true to himself and what he believed in. I'm all right with that, Ben. Right. What do you think? GBNews.com/your say. Up next, though, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, is going to tell us exactly how Labour plan to take the brakes off Britain.
Yes, and why 16-year-olds, yes, those who can't drink, smoke, fight for the country, still in school, should get the vote. Don't miss it. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Back in a sec.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, time for the best part of the show, our Greatest Britain, where we share amazing people who do amazing things. And this week, that is Dr. Leo Cheng and the Reverend Hilary Cheng.
Well, Dr. Cheng regularly serves as a volunteer surgeon aboard the Mercy ships in West Africa and has recently served his 17th mission aboard the ships. He volunteers with his wife, Reverend Hilary Cheng, a Methodist minister in the UK.
Thank you for joining us, and what a privilege. So just briefly explain, what are Mercy ships?
Well, Mercy ship provide world-class surgery on the ship, and the ship then sail to these poorest of the poor country because there's no infrastructure to get road or rail there. And we offer free surgery and also education, training of medical staff, and partner with the local or the host nation to build up their surgical and anaesthetic services.
So how long have you been travelling West Africa? You go on all these different ships, different ports, and you treat the needy and the vulnerable. How long have you both been doing this?
20 years.
20 years?
Just over 20 years.
And you take the time to do this out of your own holiday from work. Why do you do it?
Well, because I'm indebted to the education in this country with all the qualification I get. And NHS is great. I love the NHS because without NHS, we see cases that we see in the low-income country. And I want to make use of my hand to help those people who have no way of helping themselves. Because the tumours, the deformities, not just a physical ailment, but it's being ostracised and die early, commit suicide because they've been ostracised by their family.
When you're on the ship, you are seeing the very worst that the country can offer. I find it a great privilege to work alongside these people.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. It's 9:48. You're with Ben and Bev on Britain's Newsroom, only on GB News this morning.
So it's a big day. So Keir Starmer is going to pledge to take the brakes off Britain by tearing up planning restrictions to build at least 1.5 million new homes.
The plans will be announced in the King's speech and they aim to, quote, turbocharge house building, including, crucially, on the Greenbelt.
Well, Labour's National Campaign Coordinator Pat McFadden joins us now. Good morning, Mr McFadden. Lovely to see you. We've seen you on GB News a huge amount over the last few months. What's it like, first of all, being in government? How is it being on that side of the fence now?
Well, I think, in truth, we're still getting used to that change. You know, I and other politicians like me in the Labour Party have had this word shadow in front of their name for many years, having lost 4 elections in a row. So it was an enormous change to sit around the cabinet table for the first time and see, there's a little nameplate you have in front of you to see the word Secretary of State for the colleagues that I'd been serving alongside in recent years. And you see the fruition of that in the King's speech, which is going to be published today, because this is the first legislative programme from a Labour government for many, many years.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing today, apart from initial meetings and so on, is the first fruits, if you like, the first real legislative action following the general election result a couple of weeks ago.
Mr McFadden, so doing the rounds this morning is the theory that you are going to introduce votes for 16-year-olds today. I'd like to ask you, please, why you think 16-year-olds have the knowledge and the foresight to be able to vote when they can't drive, they can't get tattoos, buy alcohol, be called for jury service, can't get married without asking their mum and dad for permission, can't adopt a child, and by law, of course, they're still in school, and by the way, don't pay tax. Why do you think this is such a good idea?
Well, I think they can do some of the things that you said. You can drive when you're 17.
Not 16.
You know, I don't want to speculate too much about the measures that are in the King's speech today. We're in the slightly, you know, that period where I can't talk about individual bills, but that policy was part of our manifesto. We think there's a good case for doing this. I think the list you've given, you know, I do think many 16 and 17-year-olds have an interest now. They can exercise responsibility. They already have the vote in Scottish elections, for example, without any problems as far as I've seen. So this is a measure that we talked about during the election, but let's wait to see the King's speech later today.
I think, Pat, some of the concerns about that is that it's starting to give adult powers and adult freedoms, maybe, to children. And that might be what some people, parents particularly, will be concerned about. If you allow 16-year-olds to vote, then what else will 16-year-olds be encouraged to do, which might undermine the family and the role of parents?
Oh, I think that's a bit dramatic. Are 16 and 17-year-olds still children? They're young, certainly, but I think they're, you know, they're not beyond children at that age. I've got children approaching this age myself. I like to think of them now as young adults by the time they get to that age. There are other things you can do when you're 16 and 17, as we've discussed. But let's wait to see what's in the actual King's Speech.
Sure. I mean, my 16-year-olds, they might think they're an adult, but it's my job to point out to them that they're not. But let's move on to the planning issue, if we can, because this is a huge one. And obviously, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is pinning the growth hopes of this country on this building initiative. So can you guarantee, Pat, that these houses will be fit for the future, fundamentally? Will they be good houses with good insulation, with good energy provision? Because that, I think, will help override some of the concerns of the NIMBYs.
I think that's a really good point. Things have to be built to a proper standard. I don't think it's just about building houses. I think very often when people object to a housing development, it's partly because it's just housing. They want to know, where's the GP surgery going to be? Where is the primary school going to be? Where is the bus route going to be? So we have to think about things in terms of a whole community. And I do also want to say to your viewers, because I've done quite a few interviews on this morning, we are still in favour of brownfield first. We are still in favour of the priority for house building being in those parts of built-up areas which don't have housing on it at the moment. For example, in my own city of Wolverhampton, we've got a lot of derelict factory sites that have been lying there for decades without things built on them. Those sites should be the first priority for house building, and they will be.
We're fast running out of time, Mr McFadden, but thank you for joining us. Very much appreciated, and we'll catch up with you shortly.
Yeah, interesting. Right, lots more to come this morning. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom. Alex has your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. Yes, there will be some wet and windy weather pushing into northwestern parts later on, but for many, today it is a fine and sunny picture. Yes, plenty of blue skies around first thing, and there will be lots of sunshine to come as we go through the day, though some cloud bubbling up and also a scattering of showers around. The showers could be quite hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them, and they don't look especially heavy, especially compared to some recent days. Temperatures, especially in any sunshine, will be getting a bit higher than they have been recently. Highs of around 25, possibly 26 Celsius, and quite widely, we're looking at high teens or low 20s. As we go through this evening, and for many, it is looking largely dry. One or two showers continuing perhaps across some parts of England and Wales, but most places having a decent end to the day with some late sunshine as well. A different story further north, though. A bit more cloud pushing into parts of Northern Ireland, the winds picking up here, and a similar story for western parts of Scotland out towards the Outer Hebrides and elsewhere across Scotland. Perhaps a few more showers possible than further south, but also some sunny spells to end the day here. Through the night, we are going to see the cloud, the blustery winds and the rain spilling a little bit further eastwards across much of Northern Ireland, across parts of Scotland and perhaps into far western parts of Wales too. Elsewhere across other parts of the UK, it should stay dry overnight and there will be some clear skies, but because we have some relatively warm air across the country, temperatures aren't going to drop much, so a pretty mild, warm start to the day on Thursday. As we go through Thursday itself, more wet weather towards northwestern parts, some blustery winds and the rain continuing especially across western parts of Scotland. Could see some totals building up, but across the rest of the country, across particularly England and Wales, lots of fine sunny weather yet again. Temperatures could be a touch up on today, but it's likely to be even hotter by Friday. Could get into the low 30s. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. On the M8 in North Lanarkshire, the outside lanes closed eastbound after an accident between junctions 5 and 4A from Shotts to the Heartlands interchange. It's taking around 20 minutes in queues from just after junction 6 at Airdrie. In County Durham, the A19 is partly blocked northbound by an accident between the Seaton and Herrington interchanges, causing queues from the Merton interchange. In West Yorkshire, the A58M in a ring road in Leeds is partly blocked eastbound by a breakdown in the tunnel just after the A58 West Street junction, causing long delays. In Derby, Derbyshire, the A38 is closed each way between the A50 at Toyota Island and Clay Mills at Burton-upon-Trent after an accident with long delays towards there. And as you divert, train services have been stopped between Swindon, both Bath Spa and Bristol Parkway because of an incident. And in Hampshire, the A31 is closed westbound east of Winchester after an accident.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's our summer treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest cash prize of the year so far. With an extra £30,000 in your bank account this year, you could take the ultimate financial holiday and send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could get you those nagging home improvements done, buy that brand new car, or just enable you to kick back and relax for the rest of the year. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 17th of July, live across the UK. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Bev Turner, and Ben Leo in for Andrew Pearce.
Very good morning to you. Now, Labour promised to take the brakes off Britain in the King's speech this morning. Cameron Walker is at Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, the second King's speech of His Majesty's reign, but the first written by a Labour government. More than 1,000 soldiers and around 200 horses taking part in the pomp and pageantry as the King and Queen and Imperial State crown escorted from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster.
And Labour's housing ambitions. Sir Keir Starmer is going to pledge to tear up planning restrictions to build at least 1.5 million new homes. How will the NIMBYs, such as Ben Leo, react?
And more support for Trump. Friends and foes of Donald Trump have endorsed him overnight at the Republican National Convention. And it comes as the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged him not to forget Ukraine after appointing running mate J.D. Vance.
And it's going to take three to tango. Apparently, contestants who appear on BBC Strictly Come Dancing are going to be given chaperones after complaints about the behaviour of three former professional dancers. How bizarre. Isn't that strange that Boris Johnson went over to see Donald Trump to tell him not to back off the Ukraine conflict?
He's gone before Starmer. I know Starmer spoke to Donald Trump, but he has, Boris Johnson, he's pipped him there. But Boris, of course, accused of snubbing peace talks a few years ago in Ukraine.
Scuppering, in fact, I think was the word. Anyway, what do you think? gbnews.com/your say. First, though, the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Bev, Ben, thank you very much and good morning to you. It's exactly 2 minutes past 10 and as we heard there'll be pomp and ceremony at the King's speech as it's delivered this morning, setting out the new government's priorities. It's the second time King Charles has addressed Parliament during his reign. The speech is expected to contain more than 35 bills, with the Prime Minister saying he wants to take off the brakes of Britain. The focus will be creating jobs, building houses and improving transport. Downing Street has already confirmed there'll be legislation to start bringing railways back into public ownership. It'll also address a ban on zero-hours contracts and giving employees the right to switch off from work outside of office hours. Former Black Rod David Leakey says the ceremony is steeped in tradition.
Everybody thinks, my goodness, this is archaic. How the heck do we have a system where one of our houses in the Houses of Parliament have lords wearing red robes? Well, they wear their red robes for 1 hour every year. Rather like going to somebody's wedding or baptism or birthday party and you get dressed in your glad rags, the peers wear their glad rags just once a year when the King comes to Parliament for the King's speech.
The latest figures show inflation held at the Bank of England's 2% target last month. All eyes will now be on the central bank and whether it will cut the interest rate this summer. The government says the data is welcome news, but that prices are still high because of what they're calling the economic chaos inherited from the Conservatives. Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, though, Chris Philps, accused Labour of shameless spin and suggested to us this morning the party will introduce what he's calling sneaky tax rises.
This stuff that Rachel Reeves has been saying, claiming that the fiscal position is worse than she expected, is obvious nonsense. The OBR obviously assessed our fiscal position. They published their own forecasts a few months ago that she obviously saw. And we've seen today's inflation figure staying down at 2%, on target, lower than the Eurozone, lower than the USA, growth top of the G7.
Dame Priti Patel is reportedly entering the Conservative leadership race. The former Home Secretary is said to be assembling a campaign team funded by high-profile Tory donors, with The Telegraph saying a formal announcement is expected by the end of next week. It will be the first time she's put her hat in the ring after colleagues urged her to stand. So far, no other candidates have officially declared their plans. And in Thailand, traces of cyanide have been found in teacups inside a hotel room where 6 people were found dead in Bangkok. Police say the 3 men and 3 women were likely poisoned by one of those who died in the room of the Grand Hyatt Hotel, which was locked from the inside. Investigators say money may have been a motive after evidence showed that financial investments had been made among the group. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Much more still to come with Bev and Ben.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning to you. 10:05, Ben and Bev with you on Britain's Newsroom, only on GB News, live across the UK on TV and radio. Big discussions this morning about planning, Bev, of course. Set to be a big part of the King's speech today, where Labour unveil 30 to 35 bills, their plans for the future of the country. Great story in the Mail today. The 20 most likely areas for Labour's new towns, their buildings revolution. So, number 1, the Cambridge area. Number 2, the M1 corridor around Milton Keynes. Then it's the Thames Estuary, South Hampshire, the Midlands, particularly around Birmingham, Leicester, Nottingham. Hale near Manchester, Roundhay near Leeds, then Oxford, Norwich, Reading, Stratford-upon-Avon, Taunton, Exeter, Harrogate, Preston, Carlisle, Guildford, Peterborough, Swindon and Chelmsford. If you live in any of those areas, be warned that Labour are coming for you. They're coming to build these ghastly, in my opinion, new build homes, new build estates, which look horrible, soulless, characterless, and they're going to dig up vast swathes of the green belt for it as well.
Or you might have a young person in your life and you think, brilliant, we need some more housing so that my 25-year-old can get on the housing ladder. Don't know.
Fine. My point is, though, these developers are building these very flimsy, horrible houses. Yeah. Again, they're completely soulless and they're ripping you off. They are ripping your kids off. 3, 4, 5, 600k for houses that cost them a couple of quid. I think it's a complete scam. And in addition to that, as I said, they're tearing up the beautiful countryside. And one part of this discussion, which is omitted quite frequently, is immigration. If you're letting in 300,000 people a year into the country, you wouldn't need all these houses. So deal with immigration and then deal with houses. Otherwise, you're just chasing your tail for years.
Completely. It's just in a circle all the time, isn't it? Let's see what else people have been saying. Sorry about this.
I've got one for you, Bev.
Thank you. Sorry.
They said...
the thing that this website, of course, you talk to each other as well, which is nice because you get to know each other. It does mean sometimes it's a bit tricky for us.
It's quite frantic
things
at times.
we can read out.
John says, Bev, I get it. You'll be putting your foot forward for Strictly on behalf of GB News.
Well, that would be lovely if they're watching. I would love to learn to dance properly, and you get really fit, don't you?
But you reckon they wouldn't touch you with a barge pole?
I don't think they would go. They wouldn't, would they?
Because of your outspoken views?
Yeah, I think so.
I've got a theory on that.
I mean, I probably wouldn't be shouting about lockdowns while I was doing the tango, to be fair, but, you know.
I have a theory on that in a couple of years, 5, maybe 10 years, that companies, corporates, broadcasters, they'll do a complete U-turn on this whole sort of PC view on the world, and actually people who were previously, you know, keep them over there because they're nutters or too outspoken for our brand, I think they'll start to welcome them.
I'm definitely going to have the damehood incoming, Ben. I'm no doubt about it when people realise I was right. A lot of you commenting as well about this idea that 16-year-olds should be able to vote. As Stephen said, 16-year-olds can join the army, of course. I think we said that they can't fight on the front line, of course, but they can, of course, join the army. We were discussing it, weren't we, about whether you should be allowed to vote. I think my reservation about not letting them vote is this. The things that we don't let 16-year-olds do is because they are dangerous. So driving is dangerous. Drinking alcohol can be dangerous. Smoking cigarettes is dangerous. There's always a risk. I think with politics, I feel like the government is dangerous. So I want our young people to be engaged and to be motivated and educated about politics, and that might mean voting.
But they've had such little life experience. What do they know about the world? They've never had jobs, most likely, unless it's been in a cafe or something. They haven't got kids, of course. You know, they can't get married without asking their mum and dad for permission. I mean, I'm the other way. Yeah. I'd say you can't vote until you're 25 and you pay tax.
It's not all about the tax, though, is it? And they're in education, and they're often the victims of crime, and they have an opinion on the tech world more than we would necessarily. And so I think I'm all right with it. There's a lot of what Labour are going to do it worries me and keeps me awake at night. But I think on this, I think it's a sign of...
what next? Asylum seekers? Illegal migrants whilst they're here? That's what they're trying to do in the US?
I don't consider 16-year-olds in the same bracket as asylum seekers.
No, but my point being it leads down a path.
The only thing, in terms of using our imagination, what it leads to, I think the thing that does worry me is starting to see a 16-year-old as a child and also kind of undermining the family a little bit, that the child has a relationship with the state rather than the family. But anyway, let's move on.
Good point. OK, all right, well, as we know, Labour, they are set to, quote, take off the brakes of Britain today during the King's speech as part of the state opening of Parliament.
The King is going to make his speech at about 11:30 this morning, and outside Buckingham Palace now on a beautiful sunny day is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker to tell us the significance of the occasion. Morning, Cameron.
Good morning, Bev. Well, it's only the second King's speech of his reign, but the first, of course, written by a Labour government. It's been an incredibly busy summer for His Majesty the King. He's had Trooping the Colour, he's had the state visits of Japan, as well as the D-Day celebrations. But because of the summer election, he now has state opening of Parliament. So despite his ongoing cancer treatment, which sometimes we forget about, I think, he is determined to carry on with his duty. And, of course, as head of state, he has to open each new parliamentary session. And that's exactly what's going to happen this morning. But as well as the King being incredibly busy, the Army and the Armed Forces incredibly busy. We're expecting around 1,100 soldiers and 200 horses to either escort the Sovereign or line the routes down to the Palace of Westminster from Buckingham Palace, comprising of the Grenadier Guards, Irish Guards, Coldstream Guards, as well as the RAF and Navy as well. They've been rehearsing in secret very early in the morning over the last few days for this pomp and pageantry that we are so used to now here in central London. So the King and Queen will depart from Buckingham Palace in a carriage procession, followed by, or I should say in front, behind even, the Imperial State Crown, which gets its own carriage procession. Of course, the crown which the King wore on his way back from the coronation, comprising of more than 2,800 diamonds, and it's that the King will wear in the House of Lords, sitting on the throne when he delivers the speech. So when their Majesties arrive at the Palace of Westminster at the Sovereign's entrance, they will go up to the robing room where the King will don the imperial state crown as well as the robe of state. He will be escorted as well by the sword of state. He will then process through with Her Majesty the Queen the royal gallery before taking his throne in the House of Lords to deliver that speech. Elsewhere, we have two separate 41 gun salutes in Green Park, which is very close to where I am, so it's going to get very loud. The first for the state opening of Parliament, but the second to celebrate the Queen's 77th birthday, which is falling on today. So no rest for her on her birthday. She's having to carry out her constitutional duties as the consort of the monarch, sitting beside him in the House of Lords today. There's also going to be another gun salute in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Castle for the Queen's birthday, as well as the state opening of Parliament. Tower of London firing a gun salute as well. So very busy here in central London this morning.
Wow, what a day in store we have, Cameron. And this is what makes Britain great, makes Britain great as far as I'm concerned. The pomp, the ceremony, the identity, the history, the culture. Apparently, the King is going to change into an 18-foot red velvet cape. He'll also wear the imperial state crown encrusted with, get this, 2,886 diamonds and hundreds of other jewels. 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds, 269 pearls. Pomp, definitely. Ceremony, definitely. And I'm here for it. Thank you, Cameron, outside Buckingham Palace.
I'm here for it. Do you know, did you catch that bit then when Cameron was saying is that the imperial state crown goes in a carriage of its own? I remember that from last time thinking how there's a hat going down the street in its own carriage. It's just so ridiculous.
I can see why people think it's obscene from the outside.
Oh,
you know, Americans
so can I. I mean, so can I. It's irrational, it's illogical, right? But it's also rather
ours.
Wonderful.
And it's ours.
Because it is our identity. Right, let's go to Chris Hope now, our political editor from Westminster, because, of course, this morning, Chris, it is as much about the pomp and the pageantry, but it's also massively about the politics, of course. Do we know what to expect in the King's speech? Is it basically pulled from the manifesto?
It is indeed. And morning, Ben, and morning, Bev. Yeah, welcome to a sun-drenched Palace of Westminster. I was last here for GB News in the dark, it felt like, most of the time, back in November. And now we're back here with a new state opening of Parliament for a new Labour government. Yeah, we're expecting as many as 35 bills. That's quite a lot more than they had in 1997 after that Labour landslide. That means we won't be doing this again for 2 more years, and we'll be looking at the detail of what this Labour government wants to do. I'm struck by how limited in ambition it is. If you shut your eyes, you can imagine a Tory government doing a lot of these measures on border security, smoking ban, football governance, AI bill, Martin's Law for protection for those in terror attacks. A lot of it is carryover things which the Tories did. The things that leap out as interesting and more aggressively pro-Labour agenda is no question the planning reforms. As Ben is saying, get more homes being built. I would say, Ben, the reason why homes maybe are less quality is the land is so expensive. If the land value comes down, we might get better homes. I think that's the idea of the government's policy anyway. And also new powers for workers and to refuse to work, 0 hours contracts, a renters reform bill, all these areas. But for a government that's waited, a party that's waited 14 years to get into power, I'm struck by the lack of ambition in what we've been told so far. Of course, all of this is speculation until the King delivers the speech around 11:35 a.m. in the building behind me, live on GB News.
Chopper, is there a feeling perhaps that Labour have looked at what happened with Liz Truss, who came flying out the blocks with all these, you know, extravagant reforms and ideas, and maybe they just want to play it a bit safe, you know? I mean, I guess barring the 16-year-old voting scheme, but they just want to get into government, get their heads down and crack on without any really scandal or controversy around their plans.
Ben, I think you're right. I mean, we spoke, and Bev too, during the campaign. I mean, they advocate change, didn't they? But change really means no big change, nothing to scare the horses, if you like. And that's the point. They want to make sure that we're back to kind of a 5-year governing programme. I mean, really, this is going to take politics back to where it used to be, I think, in the 2010s and 2000s, when you've got a government trying to push through an agenda, and then you have little flare-ups of opposition, maybe to planning issues, or maybe it's to workers' rights and that kind of thing. So I think it's away from the drama of a leadership battle every so often and back into actual politics, and maybe many people welcome that.
And what happens after the speech, Chopper, as of kind of tomorrow and going forward, what then?
Well, we're facing days of King's Speech debate when you have MPs stand up and debate what the government's legislative programme is. And looking forward to next week, we've got the first Prime Minister's Questions, Bev, on Wednesday next week. And that will see, of course, roles reversed. Rishi Sunak for the opposition party, the Tories taking on the newly swept into power Sir Keir Starmer. So it's roles reversed, and we are expecting the next few days we'll hear more detail on the Tory leadership campaign, details of that, of the timetable out tomorrow, and then over the next few weeks we'll see candidates declaring their hands. So politics hasn't gone away, but for right now it's about these ideas. And they are interesting. I think Elsher's mentioned renationalising the railways, by the way. That's a big Labour idea. But I think you might see some tension in Labour ranks come September, that we've waited so long for a landslide Labour government. Is this all they're going to do?
OK, Christopher, thank you. It's going to be a busy day. Enjoy the sunshine.
We'll speak to you later, Chris, as well. Right, let's go to the break. Find out next why millennials are cutting off their parents. That's right. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
It was also announced that the Prince of Wales is set to star in a new two-part documentary on ITV covering his mission to try and eradicate homelessness.
Well, let's talk about this and much, much more with Angela Levin, royal biographer, who joins us in the studio. I'm glad to hear that this documentary's been made, Angela, because I worried that he made this big announcement about homelessness, and I thought, goodness me, here is somebody who could maybe do something about this. And then it's all seemed to have gone quiet.
He's been very busy with it, actually. He's gone all over the country to see different areas and how they have been, and to try and change people's attitude to homelessness, that they're people who need help and want to get back into a normal life, and he's there to do it. I mean, we mustn't forget that in, I think it was 2009, he slept out in the street to see for himself what it was like, and he also helped people who are selling the magazine.
Big Issue, no?
Yes, the Big Issue. And he's worked all day long with the same man twice now. So I think he was actually just covering the basic about what it was like for him and how he can now help other people. He and Catherine are putting £3 million straight away into that, and it's going to
Where
be...
does that money come from?
Their own foundation, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not taking it from our tax or anybody else's, you know. And there will be a lot more. And he's been getting the money to do this. And I think it's he wants to do this so badly because of his mother. You know, she took them to see people who were homeless.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have said stump.
you made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true.
You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good morning to you. Welcome back. It's 10:10 to 21, rather. Ben and Bev with you on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. I am standing in for Andrew Pearce this week, who's on his hollybobs, isn't he, Bev?
That's right. Now, Mike Parry and Stephen Pound are in the studio with us. Good morning, gentlemen. Right, massive day politically, isn't it, today, Mike?
Yeah.
And the issue that I think is going to affect most people at home is going to be this planning.
Yeah.
Ripping up the legislation. Does he know how hard it's going to be, do you think?
Well, the problem is that within the next Labour government, the next 5 years, we're being told that more powers will go out to the country, more powers will go to the devolved countries and all that. So it's spreading more power to the people. The only problem is, with planning, it's already with the people on a very localised basis, isn't it? Yeah. And every planning application will be appealed and appealed again, and all sorts of objections will be put up. The reason nothing ever happens in this country, I think we've been waiting now 50 years for the third runway at Heathrow. Yeah. And the problem is that there are so many bars to planning applications that you can introduce into anything that is planned to be built in this country. It never happens. And I don't think this will happen. And by the way, I'm in support of building lots more houses in this country. It's one Labour policy which I actually support. If you leave a train in North London going to Manchester or Liverpool, after you've got past Wembley and Arsenal's ground, the rest of it's all green fields.
And it's beautiful. I took a train to Newcastle the other month. It's beautiful.
It is. But there's lots of it. There's lots of it. And what I'm saying is, on some of those green fields, you can definitely build houses and spread it away from the southeast. Why not?
Can we get my tweet up from yesterday that we played about it?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I never appreciated it.
But it's a waste of land.
Well, why,
it's a complete waste of land.
Take beautiful lands like that and erect these horrible, flimsy...
because you've got to have houses. And by the way, I wouldn't mind if it was useful land and you saw a load of sheep, a load of cattle and a load of corn growing. You don't. They're just green fields.
Just design them better.
They're just no good to anybody. Put houses on them.
Well, hang on a second, Mark. For a minute, I'm sorry, I was a bit gobsmacked to hear that you actually approved of one aspect of Labour Party policy. I'd quite like to have the clip of that, if you don't mind. But look, the reality is, we're not talking about building on these verdant fields, these green and pleasant lands. We're actually talking about building on what is, in fact, may technically be green belt, but in fact is grey belt.
Is that not just semantics, though? Is that not just Labour tinkering around with the language to make it seem acceptable?
Look, a car park in Welwyn Garden City may be within the green belt area, but it's perfectly feasible to build on it. I was chair of planning for years and years in Ealing, where I come from.
Yes.
Well, I came to loathe the great crested newt and the slow worm because the number of housing applications that actually got held up because of that. But the reality is, one thing we haven't talked about is you can't build new stuff in London because the national grid cannot.
I totally agree. You told me this last time we were here.
Together. But all I can say is the Daily Mail, and they've almost gone a sort of Mike Parry Damascene conversion here, because they've actually got on their front page today. You know, it's not how but when. You know,
the greyfield sites are not profitable enough for most developers. The way you make money out of houses is you build 4 houses an acre and you double your money for the cost of the land, and you can't do that on greyfield sites.
Also, they're stopping land banking at the moment. Most of the big builders, and I could mention their names.
Millions of acres.
The land banking.
It's all very good talking about where we're going to build these houses, what they should look like, but Dominic Cummings gave a very interesting interview in the last couple of days, I think it was overnight, where he was talking about the so-called blob, where Keir Starmer, Labour, they're in government and they've got all these bright ideas, but Cummings, as we'll play this clip in a sec, was explaining that the civil service, the judiciary, the bureaucracy won't allow them to get anything done. Let's have a quick look at this clip.
People are looking at Starmer now and thinking, like, is he serious about planning reform? Is he serious about this? But what people don't really understand is that the very first thing that will happen when Starmer and Sue Gray sit around the cabinet table shortly is that a bunch of officials explain to them that, sorry, Prime Minister, but a lot of this is not just about political will. We understand that this is your priority. However, there are a whole bunch of processes around things like environmental reviews and planning stuff, which is hard-coded into primary legislation and a judicial review structure. So you're going to have planning review 1, appeal 1, judicial review, appeal of judicial review, Then after that, in about 4 or 5 years, you'll have environmental review 1, appeal, judicial review, Supreme Court, And if you look at some, like, real projects for things like building an actual road or building an actual railway now, the actual timeline for the project, like the A66, right, is like this thing for 6 years, then that thing for 6 years, then that thing for 6 years, then that thing. And then after 25 years or so, they actually start digging.
He's right, isn't he? So, of course, Dominic Cummings used to be Chief Advisor to Boris Johnson. How are Labour going to get through that?
Boris Johnson, Cummings, Dominic Cummings believed in this creative anarchy, really, of destroying it. But look, we've got Sue Gray, whose name was mentioned there. Now, when Sue Gray was Sue Conlon, she was running a pub in Newry, you know, and I have to say, she is one tough woman. And the person that she talks about in terms of admiration is, oddly enough, George Osborne. When he first came into the Treasury, he absolutely shook up the Treasury, and he said, and don't forget, the blob actually comes from Michael Gove. He's the one who talked about this great negative force that's actually holding everybody back. Look, those things about planning appeals, you can actually legislate for those planning appeals. You can actually legislate for this, but ultimately you have to make a choice. Is it the interest of the nation that we actually house our citizens in proper housing? And I take your point, Leo, about the quality of the housing, but ultimately we are simply not building enough housing, and we cannot allow ourselves to be held back by this great blancmange that is actually suffocating.
And don't underestimate the strength of local feeling. Now, I live in Epsom, right? And you wouldn't think that if you went into Wetherspoons in Epsom, the main conversation... Wetherspoons in Epsom, it's a very big one as well.
It's very nice.
Yeah, it's called the Assembly Rooms. But you wouldn't think that the main topic of conversation there would be, nobody's building any houses at the bottom of my garden. But that's all they talk about. And if you go further into Surrey, Dorking, they've got great protest movements already saying you're not building houses here.
Christopher Hope said he thought that the King's speech today was not terribly ambitious from Labour. And actually, if it is 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years, that's only 300,000 houses a year, which is the Tories' target anyway. They got they got close to that. They got about 240,000 a year. I think, so it isn't that ambitious, really.
Well, the most successful Prime Minister in terms of house building we've known in this country since the war was Harold Macmillan. And don't forget, we also had 5 new towns that were built, places like Letchworth and Welwyn and that. So we can actually do it, and they can actually become part of the community, part of society. We can actually do it. And I think it is ambitious, but the interesting point that Mike said is there's a slight contradiction here between devolving power to the regions and centralising planning power. And that is why I think Keir Starmer is meeting all the regional mayors pretty early.
It's not just about housing, though, because, in fact...
it's about transport and infrastructure.
Well, it's about transport, but it's also what else they're going to build, because Pat McFadden said this morning on another radio station, actually, about the fact that they need data centres. So there's, for instance, there's one that's in the pipeline, which is 2 data centres...
In Somerset.
In London's... Oh, no, this one's M25. In London's Greenbelt, which are... What's the size of it? It will blow your mind. 1.75 million square feet of data centres.
So how many football pitches?
I don't know.
But Stephen's already pointed out
massive
there's not enough electricity in this country to serve all these new houses.
Well, not in the southeast.
Well, absolutely. You mentioned this on a show a couple of weeks ago, and during this week I read that 3 developments in West London have had to be scrapped because there is no infrastructure to supply power to those housing estates.
GBNews.
Well,
yes, you did,
These sites, it's 3... £250,000 square feet warehouses, basically. They're going to have 171 backup diesel generators.
So energy intensive.
So make it make sense. Nothing seems to gel together, does it?
No.
Also, by the way, just to add, all this is just hot air and nonsense, because we are letting in hundreds of thousands of people into this country each year. And to keep up with demand, you're going to have to be building houses every couple of minutes. It's insane, and no one talks about migrants.
I totally agree. The 300,000 announced this morning is half of the figure I understood we had to build just to stay still, just to be paddling water. We need 600,000 a year. I'm surprised that the ambition is only 300,000 a year.
People say, well, we need immigration to grow GDP and so on. GDP per capita is contracting.
Of course it is.
It's a complete myth that migrants are good for the economy.
Well, Chris Philps said this morning, it's not about too few houses, it's about too many people.
It is.
But on the other hand, look, we're pretty much at stasis now between births and deaths. And I think we don't want to end up in a situation like Japan.
The birth rate's going down, isn't it?
Well, you have an awful problem where there's going to be like, 1 person working for every 15 people who are retired in Japan. We've got to bring people in.
Oh, don't worry, we've got universal basic income coming in under Labour. Right.
That's another story.
We've also got to build
it in Wales.
Let's not go about the second child.
You think I'm joking? Now, look, Buckingham Palace, we're looking at some pictures here. The King and the Queen will, of course, be leaving soon in their carriage, with the Imperial State Crown in its own carriage, of course, will go ahead of them to make their way to the House of Lords this morning. So we will keep you abreast of those movements there. Let's also, though, gentlemen, touch on this other story, which was the one that caught my eye. What about Joe Cox? Did you want to do this one?
Should we do this one?
Let's do that one. Millennials are turning against their families.
Unbelievable.
Have you seen this story?
Yeah, unbelievable. This is a 2-page spread in the Daily Mail. It says, growing number of millennials are deciding to go no contact and cut off their parents to protect their mental health, and it's all egged on by a series of campaigns on social media. This is so 1984-ish. It's so dystopian. I can't believe it. But they do give an example of some very famous people who are already into this. And one of them, of course, is Meghan Markle, who who's had a fallout with her father, hasn't spoken to him even since she's been married and become one of the most famous people in the world, and yet it's a growing trend. They illustrate one particular case in here where a daughter hasn't spoken to her dad for 12 years. 12 years, and yet when a family member died who was a grandparent, nobody would pass on the message from one side of the family to the other.
Millennials are born between 81 and 96.
Sorry,
it's a deterioration of the family, isn't it?
If the day dawns when we're accepting Meghan Markle as our role model, is the day that
no, I'm not. I'm saying
and shoot myself.
But she's the best public example of it.
Normalising it.
No, I think this is a nonsensical. I mean, I was one of 9 children, and some of us got on better with our parents than the others did. It's just it happens to be perfectly normal. But the idea that this is some new sort of social urge, some new mores where you don't have contact with your parents because of your mental health.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, it's the mortgage health that actually concentrates the relationship between me and my kids. Believe you me.
Yeah.
And I love them, by the way.
And we love you, Stephen, for that. Right, it's all obviously wonderful scenes down here from Buckingham Palace. A beautiful sunny day here in London. We're going to bring you that as it develops.
Do you know, so very quickly, when I actually asked somebody, one of the royal equerries, about the stagecoach with a separate crown, and they said, well, Her Majesty doesn't wear her indoor crown in the coach. She comes into the robing room, then she changes from her outdoor crown to indoor crown.
Yes.
Of course.
And it's very heavy as well. Thousands of diamonds. Anyway, we're going to go to Buckingham Palace shortly, but first, your news headlines with Sam Francis.
A very good morning to you. It's just after 11:30, and the top story this morning is, of course, that the King's speech is expected to take place in the next half hour or so, setting out the new government's priorities. These are live pictures here you can see on your screen as hundreds gather in crowds outside Buckingham Palace and the Mall in central London to see King Charles, who will address Parliament for the second time during his reign. His Majesty is expected to leave Buckingham Palace shortly. The speech is also expected to contain more than 35 bills, with the Prime Minister saying he wants to take the brakes off Britain. The focus will be creating jobs, building houses and improving transport. And Downing Street has already confirmed there will be legislation to start bringing railways back into public ownership. It'll also address a ban on 0 hours contracts and giving employees the right to switch off from work outside office hours. In other news, the latest figures show inflation held at the Bank of England's 2% target last month. All eyes will now be on the central bank and whether it will cut the interest rate this summer. The government says the data is welcome news, but added that prices are still high because of the economic chaos, they say, inherited from the Conservatives. In Thailand, traces of cyanide have been found in cups of tea inside a hotel room where 6 people were found dead. Police say the 3 men and 3 women were likely poisoned by one of those who died in the room of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Bangkok, which was locked from the inside. Investigators there say money may have been a motive after evidence showed financial investments had been made among the group. And Dame Priti Patel is reportedly entering the Conservatives' leadership race. The former Home Secretary said to be assembling a campaign team funded by high-profile donors, with The Telegraph saying a formal announcement is expected by the end of next week. So far, no other candidates have declared their plans. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Plenty more still to come on the King's speech throughout the rest of this morning.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets for you this morning. The pound will buy you $1.3030 and €1.1908. The price of gold this hour, £1,896.27 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,151 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
So we're hoping to bring you live pictures very soon of the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, leaving Downing Street. We're going to be... is this him? There he is. No, he isn't. There he is.
It's not raining.
There he is. It's not raining. Obviously now Labour in power. Apparently it's just going to...
Is Keir Starmer the first Prime Minister who carries that red file around with him all the time? Because it's got Prime Minister of the United Kingdom written on it.
It says First Lord of the Treasury.
First Lord of the Treasury, that's right.
We'll ask Chopper, who's got the expertise, when we go back to him very shortly. All the build-up to the King's speech coming up at 11:30. But for now, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. We'll be back in a sec.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. Yes, there will be some wet and windy weather pushing into northwestern parts later on, but for many, today it is a fine and sunny picture. Yes, plenty of blue skies around first thing, and there will be lots of sunshine to come as we go through the day, though some cloud bubbling up and also a scattering of showers around. The showers could be quite hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them, and they don't look especially heavy, especially compared to some recent days. Temperatures, especially in any sunshine, will be getting a bit higher than they have been recently. Highs of around 25, possibly 26 Celsius, and quite widely, we're looking at high teens or low 20s. As we go through this evening, and for many, it is looking largely dry. One or two showers continuing perhaps across some parts of England and Wales, but most places having a decent end to the day with some late sunshine as well. A different story further north, though. A bit more cloud pushing into parts of Northern Ireland, the winds picking up here, and a similar story for western parts of Scotland out towards the Outer Hebrides and elsewhere across Scotland. Perhaps a few more showers possible than further south, but also some sunny spells to end the day here. Through the night, we are going to see the cloud, the blustery winds and the rain spilling a little bit further eastwards across much of Northern Ireland, across parts of Scotland and perhaps into far western parts of Wales too. Elsewhere across other parts of the UK, it should stay dry overnight and there will be some clear skies, but because we have some relatively warm air across the country, temperatures aren't going to drop much, so a pretty mild, warm start to the day on Thursday. As we go through Thursday itself, more wet weather towards northwestern parts, some blustery winds and the rain continuing, especially across western parts of Scotland. Could see some totals building up, but across the rest of the country, across particularly England and Wales, lots of fine sunny weather yet again. Temperatures could be a touch up on today, but it's likely to be even hotter by Friday. Could get into the low 30s. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In County Durham on the A19, there's a lane closed northbound after an accident between the Seaton and Herrington interchanges, causing queues from the Merton interchange. In West Yorkshire, the A58M Inner Ring Road in Leeds is partly blocked eastbound by a breakdown in the tunnel just after the A58 West Street, with long delays on approaches to there and other routes into the city nearby. In Derbyshire, the A38 is closed southbound from the A50 at Toyota Island to Clay Mills at Burton-upon-Trent after an accident, with long delays towards there. And as you divert, in London, there are a number of road closures around Parliament Square and St James's Park for the state opening of Parliament. In Hampshire, the A31 is closed westbound into Winchester after an accident. And in East Sussex, the A259 is closed along Old London Road in Hastings after an accident and oil spill. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
.40. This is Britain's Newsroom. Bev and Ben this morning.
Very good morning to you. Now, we're going to go straight to Buckingham Palace, where GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now ahead of the King's speech today and all the pomp and ceremony that entails. Good morning, Cameron. What's going on down there? The sun is still shining. Looks pretty glorious.
Good morning, Ben. It certainly is, and the royal regalia procession has just left literally in the last 2 minutes. Buckingham Palace, 2 separate carriages, the Queen Alexandra's State's coach with 4 bay horses containing the imperial state crown, containing more than 2,800 diamonds, which the King will wear when he delivers his speech at Buckingham Palace. You just see the household cavalry beginning their escorting the carriages down the Mall towards the Palace of Westminster. The cap of maintenance is also inside the carriage, and the sword of state, familiar of course being used during the coronation service. There's a second carriage behind it, the King Edward VII town coach with 2 bay horses containing Mr. David Turner, who's a Sergeant of Arms, Colonel Duncan Dewa, who's another Sergeant of Arms, and the Crown Jeweller is in the motor car, who is Mr. Mark Appleby as well. This, of course, is the regalia procession, just for crown jewels, no members of the royal family inside that carriage, but I think it's pretty traditional. Lots of pomp and pageantry that the Crown has its own carriage, and that's exactly what we're seeing, being escorted by literally hundreds of soldiers, around 200 horses as well, taking part in these two processions from Buckingham Palace down Mall, past Horse Guards Parade and to the Palace of Westminster. When the Crown arrives at the Sovereign's entrance of the Palace of Westminster, the House of Lords side of the building, it will be taken into the robing room ahead of His Majesty the King's arrival, where when he does so he will put on the crown as well as his robe of state as well. So it's an incredibly kind of important symbolic moment, because the crown of course symbolises the monarchy being head of state, the king being head of state, and the fact that he will be wearing it during the King's speech shows that it is His Majesty's government. Although of course it's the Labour government who writes the speech, it is the King who delivers it, and it is the King who opens each parliamentary session.
Well, it looks wonderful. We've also got Michael Cole, royal expert, in the studio with us this morning. Michael, how many of these have you witnessed, and does it change at all over the years?
Very many is the short answer to that, Beverly, and good morning, Ben.
Morning.
In fact, you asked a question earlier, does this happen anywhere else in the world? And actually in Grenada, in the Caribbean, I also saw the Queen, the late Queen, open Parliament at Wellington in New Zealand. And she did the same with the gown, the garter sash, the tiara. The same ceremonial went on, not with quite the splendour of here. Now, this is a very, very important occasion. The Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has said that the state opening of Parliament is the hottest ticket in town, and he said it does wonders for the tourism industry by bringing people in, and people can connect with our great traditions. But it is rather more than that. Since 1681, Bill of Rights and all that, the primacy, the importance of Parliament, after a general election, the monarch gathers the parliamentarians, the people who've been elected to serve him or her as the new government, together at Westminster for this occasion. And, of course, it is very much the same ceremonial that's going on and has been going on for a number of years, but with subtle differences. We all see, of course, it's a long time. The Queen was there for so many years, and she made the ceremony very, very much her own. And, of course, in this country, it's not Keir Starmer's speech. It's the King's speech. It's the King's government. Administration is carried out in the name of the monarch, and the law is applied in the name of the monarch. And the monarch in the Westminster system reigns but does not rule. That is the way we run things. And many, many nations around the world, it's the Westminster system, and we've exported it successfully to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other realms of the King now, 14 realms around the world. So the ceremony is very important. It's not just something out of Alice in Wonderland and everybody looking like as if they're in a pack of cards. It's central, and it's the most significant constitutional ceremony that the monarch personally performs. And that's why it is given such prominence, and we're seeing it here, the glory of it all.
So what's going on here with these horses, Michael?
What is happening now is that the household cavalry will be waiting to escort the Irish state coach, within which will be the King and the Queen. Now, of course, there have been some incidents from time to time. The Duchess of York, Sarah Fergie, her father, Major Ronald Ferguson, was in command of the escort one year, and there'd been some trouble with the IRA, and security was a little bit sort of questionable. And he, Ronnie, decided to ride very, very close to the Queen's carriage. And when they got to the Victoria Tower, he explained it to me. He said, the Queen started calling out to me, and I thought she was going to say, good escort, good escort. But what she was saying was, Ronnie, you're too close. They want to see me, not you. So you do get those little insights, but it's very important. The household brigade, the 5 guards regiments and the 2 mounted regiments, the Life Guards and the Blues and Royals, are the Queen's in the past and now the King's personal bodyguard. So they accompany the monarch on his way to Parliament. When the monarch arrives at the Victoria Tower, the royal standard will be broken over the tower, 400 feet up on a flagpost to say the monarch has arrived, and they will progress inside, being met by the Lord Great Chamberlain with his wand of office, and they will go to the robing room where they will then get into the robes for the procession into the Lord's chamber. Inside there will be 200 peers of the realm. There's 800 of them actually, but only about a quarter of them will be able to get in. And then we'll see the time-honoured ceremonial where the Lord Great Chamberlain will give a signal to Black Rod, who will then stride through the House of Commons to the Commons chamber and bang on the door and be refused entry. Well, this is very important symbolically because that says that the Commons doesn't take orders from the King, and the King summons the Commons, and then the Commons will progress and process to the House of Lords.
Super. So we have all that to look forward to this morning. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take a very quick break. But the King's speech, of course, on Britain's Newsroom next.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
I'm joined now by royal biographer and former royal photographer, Ian Lloyd. Ian,
hello, Jacob.
Thank you Good evening. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be great, isn't it? The opportunity to go around and see where the King comes onto the balcony from. Really interesting insight to how Buckingham Palace works.
It's exciting. I went yesterday, there was a press preview, and the thing that struck me first of all is that if you're the King and or the late Queen and you're on the balcony, you can't see the Mall. I mean, we all see people coming down from the top, you know, thousands of people crowding in towards Buckingham Palace. They can't see it because of this great monument to Queen Victoria called the Queen Victoria Memorial, or they call it the wedding cake, but it blocks the view. So apparently the King has a TV in there, and the late Queen did as well. So what they do is they when they're waiting to come on, they're watching the TV to see how the crowd's getting nearer the palace. And the other thing that struck me is when we were on it looking down, is you can actually see individual faces in the crowd out there, because we looked out, you know. So they do get a good view of what's happening directly underneath the palace, you know.
So they can see individuals. So if there's a friendly face in the crowd, they can see that person and possibly even wave. But they can't see that enormous mass of people you get at the big events that goes back towards Admiralty Arch.
The other thing I learned is there's a great historical link, because the person that put the east wing on the palace, because it was originally 3 sides, and Queen Victoria had, of course, 9 children, so they had to build a 4th side for all the nurseries and things. Edward Blord was the architect, but the master builder was Thomas Cubitt.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello, welcome back. 10:50, Ben and Bev on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Some breaking news now. We're joined by our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, with some revelations about plans to disrupt today's King's speech and the ceremony. Mark, what's going on?
Yes, indeed. This is a protest group, Youth Justice, who were planning, they'd said, in fact, publicly, they were planning to disrupt the events around the King's speech. And so the police have moved in. This operation is ongoing. And so far, 10 members of this protest group, which is effectively an amalgamation of Just Stop Oil campaigners and those Palestinian, pro-Palestinian protest groups, they've said that they were going to disrupt the proceedings around Parliament, or the procession and all of the above. So the police have arrested 10 so far. They're telling us that there is a group of another 20 to 25 protesters that they know about that are on Victoria Embankment and are in the process of arresting those individuals as well. They've said in a statement, the police, that they, while legitimate protest is absolutely, accepted as part and parcel of the democratic process, anything that moves into disrupting events will not be accepted or tolerated, and that's why they've moved into arrest.
Do we know where they are, Mark? Will they have access to get close to the King and Queen?
Well, this is it. One of the real concerns in any big public event is the point where your VIPs, your principals, are out in the open. And we know, of course, the Prime Minister, in going from Downing Street to Parliament, has to be usually in a motorcade heading towards Parliament at that time. The King as well, leaving from the palace, heading up the Mall and heading over to Parliament as well in that procession, is always a point where they are at increased risk. The Metropolitan Police and all of the security services are used to being able to manage these big public events. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a risk. And we've seen it in the past with protesters trying to disrupt, jumping in front of motorcades and processions and alike. There's always the threat from terrorism that underlies everything, but these days, more likely are the activist groups, and that's what we're seeing playing out.
So this
here.
is this relatively new group, isn't it? Youth Demand. They've said Youth Demand will be disrupting the state's opening of Parliament. We disrupt because it is our duty to fight back in every way we non-violently can, and because we refuse to despair, but instead are full of hope that another way is possible. Do we expect there to be more disruption then between now and 11:30? You know what, we've got to move on, guys. Stephen Pound is still with us in the studio. Michael Cole is still with us in the studio. It's a huge political and royal day. We will be bringing you everything. Thank you so much, Mark White, as well.
Back in a tick with all the extensive coverage, but for now, Alex has your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. Yes, there will be some wet and windy weather pushing into northwestern parts later on, but for many, today it is a fine and sunny picture. Yes, plenty of blue skies around first thing, and there will be lots of sunshine to come as we go through the day, though some cloud bubbling up and also a scattering of showers around. The showers could be quite hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them, and they don't look especially heavy, especially compared to some recent days. Temperatures, especially in any sunshine, will be getting a bit higher than they have been recently. Highs of around 25, possibly 26 Celsius, and quite widely, we're looking at high teens or low 20s. As we go through this evening, and for many, it is looking largely dry. One or two showers continuing perhaps across some parts of England and Wales, but most places having a decent end to the day with some late sunshine as well. A different story further north, though. A bit more cloud pushing into parts of Northern Ireland, the winds picking up here, and a similar story for western parts of Scotland out towards towards the Outer Hebrides and elsewhere across Scotland. Perhaps a few more showers possible than further south, but also some sunny spells to end the day here. Through the night, we are going to see the cloud, the blustery winds and the rain spilling a little bit further eastwards across much of Northern Ireland, across parts of Scotland and perhaps into far western parts of Wales too. Elsewhere across other parts of the UK, it should stay dry overnight and there will be some clear skies, but because we have some relatively warm air across the country, temperatures aren't going to drop much. So a pretty mild, warm start to the day on Thursday. As we go through Thursday itself, more wet weather towards northwestern parts and blustery winds, and the rain continuing especially across western parts of Scotland. Could see some totals building up, but across the rest of the country, across particularly England and Wales, lots of fine sunny weather yet again. Temperatures could be a touch up on today, but it's likely to be even hotter by Friday. Could get into the low 30s. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£30,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours. It's our biggest cash prize of the year so far, and you could be getting that winning call from us to tell you that you're our next Great British Giveaway winner.
Oh, I can't believe this.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
That is absolutely fantastic.
We're over the moon.
I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh, you shocked me. I never won a penny in my life.
If I was there, I'd buy you a drink.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. It's a very exciting show this morning on GB News, of course, with me, Bev Turner, and Ben Leo.
Very good morning to you. Now, it's the state opening of Parliament, the pomp, the ceremony that goes with it. King Charles, as we can see right now, is leaving Buckingham Palace. We're joined by an array of expert panellists today, including former royal correspondent Michael Cole, who can talk us through what we're seeing and hearing right now. Michael.
Yes, well, there we are. We're seeing the Irish state coach leaving Buckingham Palace.
This was just a few moments ago, apparently. We're not seeing this exactly live.
OK. Well, it's a time-honoured ceremonial. The Windsor grey horses pulling the carriage, and inside we will see the King and the Queen travelling together in state the mile and a bit to the Palace of Westminster, from one palace to another, where ceremonially he will open the new session of Parliament by reading the King's speech, which is an outline with a little detail of the government's proposed programme of legislation for this Parliament.
We're slightly nervous this morning because Mark White is here with us. There's been some arrests already today, Mark. How many people have been arrested at this protest from Youth Demand?
Well, 10 people arrested so far from a group called Youth Demand, which is a protest group, an amalgamation of Just Stop Oil environmentalists and pro-Palestinian groups. They had threatened to carry out an operation disrupting this procession that we're looking at now, and so police moved in. They've arrested 10 people so far. However, another 25 members of this activist group are, we're told, on the embankment at the moment at Embankment Gardens, and there is an ongoing police operation by the Metropolitan Police to move in and to arrest those individuals as well, because of the threats that this activist group made to try to disrupt the progress of this procession.
Rafe Haydan-Manku is with us as well. Rafe, no suggestion that there may be a physical threat to the King and Queen at this point, but how will the palace itself respond to this sort of disruption? Will they be very well organised in terms of expectation?
Unfortunately, in this day and age, everyone has to expect that this sort of thing is, if not inevitable, a very real possibility. Look, one of the great benefits of living in a constitutional monarchy is that we enjoy the right to protest. It's the fundamental thing which the Crown guarantees. But, you know, there's another protest taking place today by Republic, the anti-monarchy organisation. They have gone about this the correct way. They have secured permission, they have been given their side, and they're engaged in peaceful protest. What we're talking about now, what Mark is referring to, is a very different thing. It's actually an attempt to disrupt the constitution of this country, because that's what this ceremony is. We are seeing the living embodiment of our constitution displayed before us, almost being reenacted. And to interfere with that is actually to interfere with the democracy of the nation, because this is the opening of Parliament.
We're also joined by former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, we saw it with Jeremy Corbyn when he was, I was about to say, indicted into the Commons. He took the oath, didn't he? Slightly the wrong word. He called the ceremony nonsense. We saw it with Clive Lewis, the MP, saying that, you know, he wanted a republic and so on. Why do these people hate everything that's great about this country?
Well, you'd have to ask them, but I mean, in all honesty...
What do you think?
As far as I'm concerned, the House of Commons sits in the name of God and the monarch. Every piece of legislation that we pass has to be ultimately approved by the monarch. We cannot make laws unless they are approved by the monarch. And, you know, I accept that. That is what the state that we live in. But I think Clive Lewis is actually having to go back and re-swear now.
He is.
Because apparently he wasn't actually legitimately a member of Parliament because of all that rather nonsense he did. But this umbrella organisation, this weird bunch of people, I mean, my first thought was, is this a distraction technique that we used to see in Northern Ireland, where people would say they're going to do something, then distract, you know, the forces of law and order. But in all honesty, what kind of people announce that they're going to do this sort of disruption? And unless they are longing to have their collars felt and they're longing to be victimised, and then they can say that we're martyrs of this dreadful state. As far as I'm concerned, if you imagine a group of people trying to drag their reputation even lower, this would be the scenario that you would undertake.
Well, I guess they pre-announce it because it gets some headlines. They probably know they'll be arrested, and that is the intention of
it's embarrassing.
They want the headlines, don't they? We're going to go to GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster, who I believe is in Westminster now. Catherine, what's going on where you are?
Yes, good morning to both of you. Well, the sun is splitting the stones. It's quite a contrast from when I was last here for the King's first speech. That was back in November with a different government. The weather was very gloomy. But behind me, the roads are closed off, of course. There is a band playing. I think they're playing Anything Goes at the moment, but just a few minutes ago, very, very surreal. They were playing the theme tune from Top Gun Maverick with all this British pomp and pageantry. So a couple of very beautiful carriages with horses. One of the horses not too happy at all, but was brought under control. But the King arriving at about 11:20 here, going into the House of Lords. Then Black Rod will go and knock on the door of the Commons. The Commons will close the door in his face, emphasising the sovereignty of the House of Commons, and then all the MPs will troop along to hear the King's speech at about 11:35. In terms of what to expect, about 35 bills, a few of them carried over from the last government. So Rishi Sunak's smoking and vapes bill, we expect to be in there. Martin's Law, beefed up terror legislation, but of course lots from the new government, particularly focused on building. They want to build 1.5 million homes, renationalising the railways, a national energy company. Sir Keir Starmer tweeting on X in the last hour or so, saying, today we set out new laws to create wealth in every corner of our country to make people better off. Also, they have borrowed the language of vote leave, the Brexit days, take back control, they say. So big plans, but of course, getting growth, which is their central mission, is very, very much easier said than done, because we've had an economy that's been pretty much flatlining since the financial crisis. As a result of that, we, haven't seen the growth in income to boost our public services. There's not a lot of money around, so huge challenges, but lots of pledges that things are going to get better. Let's see what happens.
OK, Catherine Forster there at Westminster, thank you so much. Let's go now to Cameron Walker outside of Buckingham Palace, I presume. What have you seen so far, Cameron?
Yeah, the Sovereign's carriage escort well and truly underway here in central London. Just around 5 minutes or so ago, the King and Queen departed Buckingham Palace. They are still continuing on the way to the Palace of Westminster in the Diamond Jubilee State coach pulled by 6 Windsor grey horses. There's a number of other carriages in that procession containing members of the royal households. I also have been given details by Buckingham Palace to exactly what they are wearing. So His Majesty is wearing the Admiral of the Fleet Royal Navy No. 1 dress with cap and sword. When he arrives at the Palace of Westminster, he will, of course, put on that imperial state crown, which travelled in the carriage procession a little earlier on, as well as the robe of state. The Queen, on the other hand, she will be putting on the George IV state diadem and robe of state. It is all this pomp and pageantry that is going on. Hundreds and hundreds of people are lining the route here around the Queen Victoria Memorial, down the Mall, and then towards Westminster as well. The imperial state crown, of course, originally made for Queen Victoria's coronation, but used during the state opening of Parliament. 2,868 diamonds, 273 pearls, 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds, and 5 rubies as well. So it is a day of pomp and pageantry, but the King has a very important constitutional role here, as we've been discussing in the studio and here in Westminster and in central London as well. He is the only one, as head of state, who can open a new parliamentary session. He will be reading the King's speech, we think around 11:30, inside the House of Lords, sat on the throne, wearing his royal regalia, including the imperial state crown, of course written by the Labour government, the first Labour government of his reign, but the second King's speech of his reign.
Okay, thank you very much, Cameron, from a beautiful Buckingham Palace. Now, back in the studio, we've got the A-team here. We've got our royal experts, Rafe Hayden Manku and Michael. Not literally the A-team, Barack. And it's a Barack Obama.
Fool.
Well done. I knew you'd have an impression.
Interesting.
I'm BJ Baracus.
Right. What are we seeing here, Michael?
Well, coming down Whitehall, here we have the Irish state coach with the escort of the lifeguards drawn by the Windsor grey horses, as Cameron was just saying. And a big treat for where Catherine Catherine Forster, our reporter and good colleague, was standing, just by that, as a special privilege, the pupils of Westminster School are allowed to stand there and give an extra large cheer when the King arrives. And of course, he will then go inside and be robed and go in to meet and greet his lordships, the peers of the realm. Now, there are 800 of them. There's no bigger legislative body in the world, except in communist China. 800 of them there, all on £320 a day, by the way, which we're paying for as taxpayers. And maybe we'll hear in the King's speech from the Prime Minister's plans to limit to some extent the membership of the House of Lords, which is getting scandalously large and is open to misuse, I think, by some of the members. That will be perhaps a feature of this speech which we're going to hear today. But going back to the protesters, Stephen Pound said, what sort of people are they? I'll tell you, they're puerile and they're irresponsible, and they do whatever cause they have a tremendous amount of damage in the process. What happened to the kind politics, the new politics, the tolerant politics that we were advised was going to be coming with this new massive...
The non-disruption, Michael. Rafe, talk us through what we're seeing here, would you?
So, yes, so now the carriage with the royal party is arriving at the sovereign's entrance to Parliament, and the Palace of Westminster was actually built specifically for this day. The very layout of the building was designed to show off the state opening of Parliament as majestically as possible. And so the sovereign is now arriving at the sovereign's entrance. He will then be met by the Earl Marshal, who organises coronations and state events, and the new Lord Great Chamberlain, Lord Carrington, who will then lead a procession to the robing room, and from there through the Royal Gallery into the House of Lords. Then Black Rod will go to the House of Commons to summon the members of the House of Commons. And that's all laid out wonderfully in the very fabric of the building, because the idea here is to show the evolution of our democracy. What we're seeing here is theatre. It's theatre which is a lesson in history and a lesson in the Constitution. And here, of course, we can see the interior of the House of Lords, which is the one time of the year when all the elements of Parliament come together. The Crown, the House of Lords, and the Commons create the Crown in Parliament. But also here, of course, we see the judges, the King on the bench. We have the judiciary here, as well as the executive. All of the Privy Councillors are there, being the King in Council. So we have here the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature all together in this great sort of Rotarian scene, which is a great, wonderful lesson of why we are the world's oldest continuous, unbroken democracy.
And Stephen Pound, there's some elements of today which have happened behind the scenes, including a gaslit hunt for explosives. The staff members go down to the cellars of the Houses of Parliament looking for explosives in a nod to the failed 1605 gunpowder plot. What's it like as an MP? You've done 20, how many of
22 years I did.
What's it like?
I got time off for good behaviour. This is an extraordinary case. I mean, one of the problems with searching for the gunpowder is, of course, that the Palace of Westminster has moved so much, long before it was rebuilt in 1834, and the river used to wobble around all over the place. So where they now search is nowhere near where Guy Fawkes, a man who's variously described as a freedom fighter and the only person to enter Parliament with honest intentions, was actually searching for the gunpowder. But look, what does happen? I used to love taking school children on this procession, this route, because they come in through the sovereign's entrance and then they come up the stairs and into the robing room. And I think, Rafe, I'm sure everybody around this table knows that there's a certain section of the wainscoting there, of the linen fold panel on which contains within it a secret toilet. Because should Her Majesty, or His Majesty now, require that facility, then this secret panel opens. And I was told, on very good authority, not the Duke of Norfolk, but by somebody of equal stature, that should the monarch actually make use of this, it is immediately destroyed and smashed so that it doesn't end up on eBay in the morning. And so it's that. And of course the school kids used to love that. And I used to say, look around the royal robing room. You will actually see depictions of the Christian virtues, charity and hospitality. And that is the key important thing, because that's where the monarch says the monarch may rule the nation, but subservient to God. And I think that's an incredibly important point.
So there are more than 2 thrones then, Stephen?
Oh, very good.
I should just say we're now seeing the Honourable Corps of the Gentlemen-at-Arms assembling. These are the bodyguard of the sovereign, founded by King Henry VIII. You have to be under 55. The average age is 52. They always looked old to me, and now I realise I'm actually the same age as the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen-at-Arms, and they rank between the major and colonels, and they always accompany the sovereign along with the yeomen of the guard at any of these important state occasions. But what a glorious room that is. I think this is the finest chamber of any legislature in the world, designed by Augustus Pugin, who went mad famously because his attention to detail was so great. But it is one of the great splendid buildings of the world, and it's lovely to see this taking place.
What is amazing is when you come in there, the place is full of duchesses and people, all with tiaras. And when the TV lights come on, the bling explodes in front of us. All the diamonds flash. It's like going through 101 speed cameras at the same time. It's extraordinary stuff.
Stephen's quite right, because when the monarch enters, the full lighting is put on. It's very, very stagey. This is a beautiful tableau. It's a beautiful tableau, and there's nothing quite like this neo-Gothic chamber in the world. The 2 thrones upon which the King and Queen will sit are modelled exactly on the coronation throne across the road in Westminster Abbey. Reimagined by Pugin, but reimagined brilliantly. Incidentally, the man who walks in front of the monarch, but backwards, holding a wand, the Lord Great Chamberlain, that is an office that alternates between 2 families, the Carringtons and the Cholmondeleys. And when there's a change of reign, then the other family takes over. So the Cholmondeleys had it for an awful long time, 70 years, while the Queen, the longest throne.
And one of the perks of being a Lord Great Chamberlain is you get to take the consort's throne home with you when it's not in use. And so if you went to see David Cholmondeley at Houghton, the throne would be there. It's just 1 inch shorter than the sovereign's throne. Apart from that, they are
and you don't
identical.
Have a hostage that happens on the night before.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, explain that to our viewers.
One member of the House of Commons is held hostage in Buckingham Palace, and vice versa. So just to make absolutely sure that loyalty is observed.
Do we know who it is today? Who the hostage is?
Yes, we do. It's a female MP, isn't it?
That's right.
It's Samantha Dixon.
Who is always one of the government whips.
One of the government whips, Samantha Dixon.
It's the third senior whip, who's also Vice Chamberlain of the household, and it's her role to act as a messenger between Parliament and the sovereign.
But exactly the same thing happens in America, because when the President goes to the Capitol to give his address to the Union, the State of the Union address, one member of the government, one of the Secretaries of State, stays in the White House in case, for some reason, and maybe it's not that outlandish, the whole of the government and the President are wiped out while they're actually in the Capitol. So at least there will be one government minister from the administration still alive.
I think we're imminently going to see Black Rod, and I'll get the expertise of you, Stephen, Michael and Rafe, about who Black Rod is, what the procession means, and the ceremony means in terms of that. But Mark White, if we just come back to you briefly about these arrests, in light of what happened with Donald Trump over the weekend, is there heightened security concerns today with what's going on?
There's always heightened security around these big state occasions, especially as you have the movement of very senior people, royal family members, the King, of course, from the likes of Buckingham Palace up to the Palace of Westminster, and it's at that point when there is the most risk. So they're well used to this. They guard the route. They have the same sort of things that we've been talking about over the weekend with these advanced police units that go in and search for explosives, make sure there's no line of sight areas that there could be, for instance, snipers.
Will there be police snipers in Westminster now?
On certain buildings, you will see 100%. Police snipers on rooftops.
And would you mind just recapping what's happened with these arrests? Who's been arrested? How many? Why?
Well, this is a group called Youth Demand, which is an offshoot, effectively, of the activist groups like Just Stop Oil and the pro-Palestinian groups. They had threatened to carry out protests that they planned to disrupt the state opening of Parliament, and so the police moved in. They've arrested 10 so far. However, there's another group of some 25 activists who are on Victoria Embankment, just in the gardens there. They're now surrounded by Metropolitan Police officers who are moving into that crowd and arresting them one by one. Anyone who's covered protests will have seen this many times before. They effectively, I think the term that was used over the years was kettling. They effectively put a secure police cordon around them, and then they just go in and pick them off one at a time, take them away and remove them from the scene.
Very difficult, isn't it, though, to account for one lone person with a gun, as we saw at the weekend with Trump. Far be it from me to correct either of you to royal experts on my left, but apparently it was the Diamond Jubilee State coach that the King and Queen were in this morning.
Really? Well, that is a change in tradition.
Well, it's understandable, because the Diamond Jubilee state coach is the most modern of the state coaches.
Made in Australia.
Made in Australia. They took it in 2040. It's got suspension.
Can I ask, a stupid question, does it have bulletproof glass? Do you know?
I did actually look into that, but I forgot what I found out. That was a while back.
If it does, they wouldn't have said so. Yeah. By the way, what we're looking at here, the entire diplomatic corps, ambassadors and so on, are all invited, and there's a premium on places in the galleries to actually see the ceremonial. Many of these diplomats, ambassadors and lesser people have never seen anything like this before, and they never will see anything like it again. That is an interesting change. Thank you for bringing that up, that they used. It's a magnificent coach made in Australia, and it's the only really modern one. All the other ones, most of them, date from the Victorian era.
Why was it made in Australia? Just out of
I think.
Well, they made the Australian state coach in the 1980s, and they're great. It's the same company that made them both, Frecklington, and
they do it very well.
They do it very well. It's got wonderful pieces of our history in it, pieces from HMS Victory, but importantly, it's got that suspension, and it's got heating and air conditioning, which are all things, and of course, when you're of the age of our King and Queen, are more important.
And by the way, of course, the Queen, 77 today. Happy birthday to her.
Correct.
That is her birthday.
Yeah.
She married a toy boy, of course. He's about he's 75.
Nothing wrong with that.
He'll catch up. He'll catch up. He'll be 76 in November 14th.
Michael, is the Queen having is she missing out by her birthday falling on today? What would normally happen on the Queen's birthday?
Well, wouldn't you say you'd like to go to Parliament on your birthday? I mean, this is quite extraordinary. An event like this, all the great and the good gathered together in one small room. I'm sure she will enjoy it immensely. Maybe she'd like to go back to the palace afterwards and perhaps have a small drink and maybe even a cigarette on the quiet. But this is duty. This is what they.
Queen, does she?
She does.
How many a day?
Every now and then, but not near the king. Outside, I think, well away from him. But that makes her more human. It makes her more down to earth with people, and she's tremendously good news for him. And people warm to her. And we saw that in Jersey and Guernsey, how much she did well. Apparently, she sprained her ankle today. We probably won't see that. She'll be wearing a long. Yesterday, she sprained her ankle. We won't be seeing that. She'll be wearing a long gown. The king will be sitting in the throne on, as we look at it, on the left-hand side, and the Queen next to him. And I think the Prince of Wales will be there, and he will be in his seat at a lower level, not at the top of the rostrum there. And there you see, as I say, a fine collection of peers of the realm in their robes, which they don't wear very often, and many of them don't actually own. I think they hire them, don't they, Stephen? I think
do.
They pretty sure.
Even Ravenscroft, yeah. And they've got
yeah, you're right.
We've got Lord West, we can see there, former Admiral in the Royal Navy, who's
a Labour
peer. Of course, we also have a new Labour Lord Chancellor in the person of Miss Mahmood, and traditionally the Lord Chancellor who hands the speech to the sovereign then walks backwards down the stairs. And last year we did have that with Alex Chalk, the then Lord Chancellor, also wearing the full-bottomed wig. So we remain to see whether that tradition will be continued.
Well, Lord Chancellor generally...
Alex Chalk is about 6'7", which is quite tricky. Shabana Mahmood, who's the present one, is much shorter than that. But what's absolutely amazing about this is when the speech is handed to the monarch, and the monarch then reads the speech, and it's not there their words. It's the words of... It's an obvious point, but a lot of people don't actually appreciate this. And I remember one of the first ones I went to when the late Her Majesty read Tony Blair's speech back in '97, and it was all about banning fox hunting. And I can still remember her voice almost breaking. And Prince Philip was next to her. What did he say? You know, but it is marvellous. And this is so uniquely wonderful about our Constitution, that the monarch and the legislature actually come together, and it's enunciating the programme through. And of course, what's in the King's speech is then the legislative programme.
It's a press release, isn't it? It's a press release for the year. It's what the agenda is.
It's a signpost. It's a statement of intention.
Now here you see Black Rod going off on his duty.
Is it her?
To summon the... Yes, it is her.
Yeah.
To summon the Commons. But the Lord Chancellor normally sits on the woolsack when presiding over the Commons, but that has been removed to accommodate all the peers for this great day, and the procession from the Commons will begin very, very soon.
Yes,
they're picking up the mace in the Commons chamber, which is the symbol of the power of the Commons, and goes with the Speaker leading, preceded by his learned counsel, and they will continue through the Palace of Westminster to the Lords.
So Black Rod today is Sarah Clarke. She was appointed Lady Usher of the Black Rod in November 2017, formally taking up the role in February 2018.
So there are 775 members of the House of Lords. We'll bring you that footage back in just a moment. How will they decide who gets to be there today, Rafe? Do we know? Will they all be there? Can they all be there at one time? Presumably not.
They can't all fit in. They can't all fit in, and I suppose not.
There's a lottery.
Not everyone goes in.
You don't get there early with your towel like a sunbed. You can't get there.
This is a problem because I mean a number of their lordships are not in the first fine flush of their youth, and they're having to sit there for a couple of hours beforehand. And I don't want to keep referring to micturation, but I mean this is an aspect of it. You know, you're sitting there for quite a long time, so it's only the people who can stay there. But there are certain people, you know, like the Lord Chancellor, Lord Chamberlain, you have, you know, Black Rod, you have the gold stick pursuivant and the Dutch cap of state, all those weird things like that. You know, there are those people who are entitled to be there, but the rest of them, it's just first come, first served. But the interesting thing is that the bar of the House of Lords, which is the only place the commoners from the Commons are allowed to approach at, can probably maybe accommodate 25 people. And there are about 600 people from the House of Commons desperate to come in there, forcing their way, hiding behind the curtains, pushing in at the last minute. And of course, it's supposed to be this dignified procession from the Commons to the Lords, where the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition walk together, pretending that they're friends. And then everybody, then you can see them desperately trying over here, and that's when you actually see the dignity is slightly diluted and diminished.
Of course, one of the things we're hoping to see is whether Lords reform will be one of the things mentioned in the King's speech, because what's being proposed is the an 80-year mandatory retirement. Although the King himself, given his age, might be thinking whether that's an appropriate age to retire as well. But we haven't seen the Black Rod ceremony just yet. What we did see was the arrival, the Speaker's procession. So the Speaker is now in the Commons chamber with the mace, and once the Sovereign sits down on the throne, he will then nod to Black Rod, and Black Rod will then proceed across Central Lobby to the Commons chamber to summon the peers, to summon the members of the House of Commons. Unfortunately, one tradition has ended, and that was your colleague, Stephen, Dennis Skinner, who would always come out with a wonderfully witty barb, but we haven't had that for a few years because he's no longer in the chamber.
Said, you know, where's Barbara Windsor or something like that. But what's interesting, I mean, I happen to have just been informed that the one member of the Commons who did manage to get to the head of the procession in between the Prime Minister was none other than Richard Tice.
Is that right?
Yeah, now, if you have a look at the film's age, is that correct, Mark?
Well, they've gone to Parliament, certainly, with Nigel Farage as well, so...
If anyone can get in the camera, I think we can rely on them.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Somebody on gbnews.com/yoursay has said 735 Lords on £350 a day just to sit there, Stephen Pound.
They have to be there for 5 minutes. They pop in before lunch and they've got their beer money, haven't they?
Well,
they go out and they can have a nice time.
You obviously spend more on your beer than
Interestingly, we have, of course, a bicameral parliament, 2 chambers. There are many countries around the world, very respectable democracies, that only have one. I'm thinking of New Zealand, Denmark, Israel. They are unicameral parliaments. And there's a very strong argument, do we need the House of Lords, particularly as it's being used more and more as a parking place for one might even say, failed politicians. And they've got a job for life, and they jemmy unwelcome MPs out of the Commons. They get offered a peerage in order to give up their seat because, here we see the procession of the monarch.
Rafe, if you can elaborate.
So the monarch is walking past now the cap of maintenance, the ancient symbol of monarchy that is always carried at these events, and Her Majesty and His Majesty are now approaching the dais where they will be seated on the thrones. They're accompanied by their heralds, Garter King of Arms, and all the other heralds and pursuivants, and we see the Lord Great Chamberlain as well. To Her Majesty's left, we have her companions, previously known as ladies in waiting, a modernisation that she went through by ending the role of ladies in waiting. And to their left, we have the sword of state, which always precedes the sovereign. And we now await for the king to signify to Black Rod that he's ready to receive his loyal members of Parliament.
And then we will hear him say, "Pray be seated," and that will be
My
the
lords,
beginning.
pray be seated.
With the white wand there, we see the Lord Great Chamberlain. Black Rod serves essentially...
What's happening now, Ray?
And so now we're waiting for Black Rod, who is essentially the Sergeant of Arms for the House of Lords and the King's Messenger, to proceed to the House of Commons. That's a view from inside the House of Commons.
Black Rod! That's the senior doorkeeper.
And so now we see the arrival of Black Rod, who will summon the members of Parliament to the Lords.
Mr. Speaker, the King commands this honourable House to attend His Majesty immediately in the House of Peers.
And now the mace will be carried by the Sergeant-at-Arms, who will lead the Speaker, and then there'll be a pairing of the members of the government with their equivalent number on the opposite benches, and it will be a bittersweet moment, I'm sure, if that's an understatement, for Rishi Sunak, who just 8 months ago walked alongside Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, and now those roles have been reversed. What we also had just before then, we had the doors of the House of Commons were slammed shut into the face of Black Rod, who then had to strike the door 3 times with that Black Rod, and that is done to, in a sense, symbolise the independence of the House of Commons. This dates back to 1642, when King Charles became the last king to enter the House of Commons to arrest 5 members, and after that it was decided that they had to have a symbol by which they could demonstrate their independence from the Crown.
When Speaker Lenthal said, "I have not eyes to see, not ears to hear, but what their House command me." If you actually go to that door now, you can see the bashes on the wall, the great indentations in the door, just by where the doorkeepers sit.
We saw Prime Minister Keir Starmer there, walking along with his shadow, of course, now Rishi Sunak. They seem to be chatting quite convivially, Stephen, after weeks of tearing chunks out of each other in the run-up to the election.
But isn't that a good thing?
Well,
Sure.
you came on to my point. That's exactly what I was going to say. There is something quite lovely about this event today. in a world in which people become very entrenched in their opinions and have a very binary position, and we see political tensions bubbling over across the world, even culminating in assassination attempts. I think this is a day for the UK to be very proud, actually, of the fact that we handle these state occasions with such dignity. I think it's a really important reminder that we do this very well, Stephen. What will it be like for those people who are MPs for the very first time?
Well, they will be, on the one hand, absolutely confused about this because they'll be terrified of doing the wrong thing. Because there's a lot of doorkeepers there who have a marvellous way of sort of raising an eyebrow and saying, I'm not sure you would want to do that, sir or madam. But most of those people will try to get into their lordship's house, into the House of Peers, but they won't be able to because there simply isn't enough room. So a lot of them will be milling around Central Lobby. But those who can come in, and a lot of people will actually be watching this, all the screens in the House of Commons will actually be showing this live. So a lot of people will be sitting in the tea room in Portcullis House actually watching it. And I'm pretty sure that most of them will be overwhelmed. There'll be one or two people who, who wish to make a sort of a silly fool of themselves and make some silly comment. But most people will actually see this is the British Constitution. This is an enduring constitution. And by and large, it served this nation pretty well.
Well, Michael Cole, this is the People's Channel. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Some people on gbnews.com/your say are saying, including Colin, pompous guff, money for absolutely nothing.
It's very, very important for the symbolism of this country. It has a purpose, and it's all to do with continuity. That's a very comforting thing if you live in a country where there is no continuity, where there's chopping and changing. And what we're seeing now is our best defence against dictatorship and autocracy, because every piece of legislation has to be signed off by the man there we're watching, the King, eventually. And that is a great guard against extremism in this country, because every Tuesday night the King meets the Prime Minister in a completely private situation.
Members of the House of Commons.
Sorry to interrupt.
My government will govern in service to the country. My government's legislative programme will be mission-led and based upon the principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all. Stability will be the cornerstone of my government's economic policy, and every decision will be consistent with its fiscal rules. It will legislate to ensure that all significant tax and spending changes are subject to an independent assessment by the Office for Budget Responsibility. Bills will be brought forward to strengthen audit and corporate governance alongside pension investment. Securing economic growth will be a fundamental mission. My government will seek a new partnership with both business and working people and help the country move on from the recent cost of living challenges by prioritising wealth creation for all communities. My ministers will establish an Industrial Strategy Council. It is my government's objective to see rising living standards in all nations and regions in the United Kingdom. My ministers will get Britain building, including through planning reform, as they seek to accelerate the delivery of high-quality infrastructure and housing. They will also pursue sustainable growth by encouraging investment in industry, skills, and new technologies. My government is committed to making work pay and will legislate to introduce a new deal for working people, to ban exploitative practices and enhance employment rights. It will seek to establish the appropriate legislation to place requirements on those working to develop the most powerful artificial intelligence models. My government believes that greater devolution of decision-making is at the heart of a modern dynamic economy and is a key driver of economic growth, and my ministers will introduce an English devolution bill. Legislation will be introduced to give new powers to metro mayors and combined authorities. This will support local growth plans that bring economic benefit to communities. A bill will be introduced to allow local leaders to take control of their local bus services. My ministers will bring forward legislation to improve the railways by reforming rail franchising, establishing Great British Railways, and bringing train operators into public ownership. Taken together, these policies will enhance Britain's position as a leading industrial nation and enable the country to take advantage of new opportunities that can promote growth and wealth creation. My government recognises the urgency of the global climate challenge and the new job opportunities that can come from leading the development of the technologies of the future. It is committed to a clean energy transition which will lower energy bills for consumers over time. A bill will be introduced to set up Great British Energy, a publicly owned clean power company headquartered in Scotland, which will help accelerate investment in renewable energy such as offshore wind. Legislation will be brought forward to help the country achieve energy independence and unlock investment in energy infrastructure. A bill will be introduced to support sustainable aviation fuel production. My government recognises the need to improve water quality, and a bill will be introduced to strengthen the powers of the water regulator. My government will seek to strengthen the border and make streets safer. A bill will be introduced to modernise the asylum and immigration system, establishing a new border security command and delivering enhanced counter-terror powers to tackle organised immigration crime. Legislation will be brought forward to strengthen community policing, give the police greater powers to deal with antisocial behaviour, and strengthen support for victims. Measures will be introduced to improve the safety and security of public venues and help keep the British public safe from terrorism. My government will bring forward plans to halve violence against women and girls. My ministers will seek to raise educational standards and break down barriers to opportunity. Action will be taken to get people back in employment following the impact of the pandemic. A bill will be introduced to raise standards in education and promote children's well-being. Measures will be brought forward to remove the exemption from value-added tax for private school fees, which will enable the funding of 6,500 new teachers. My government will establish Skills England, which will have a new partnership with employers at its heart, and my ministers will reform the apprenticeship levy. Legislation will be introduced to give greater rights and protections to people renting their homes, including ending no-fault evictions and reforming grounds for possession. Draft legislation will be published on leasehold and commonhold reform. A bill will be introduced to establish an independent football regulator to ensure greater sustainability in the game and strengthen protections for fans. My government will improve the National Health Service as a service for all, providing care on the basis of need, regardless of the ability to pay. It will seek to reduce the waiting times, focus on prevention, and improve mental health provision for young people. It will ensure mental health is given the same attention and focus as physical health. My ministers will legislate to modernise the Mental Health Act so it is fit for the 21st century. A bill will be introduced to progressively increase the age at which people can buy cigarettes and impose limits on the sale and marketing of vapes. My ministers will also legislate to restrict advertising of junk food to children, along with the sale of high caffeine energy drinks to children. a draft bill will be brought forward to ban conversion practices. My government will take steps to help rebuild trust and foster respect. Legislation will be brought forward to introduce a duty of candour for public servants. A bill will be introduced to establish a statutory Armed Forces Commissioner to act as a strong, independent champion for our gallant armed forces and their families. Legislation on race equality will be published in draft to enshrine the full right to equal pay in law. My government will strengthen its work with the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland so that the best outcomes possible are delivered for citizens across the United Kingdom. My ministers will establish a new Council of the Nations and Regions to renew opportunities for the Prime Minister, heads of devolved governments and mayors of combined authorities to collaborate with each other. My government will continue to support the political institutions and devolved government in Northern Ireland. In consultation with all parties, measures will be brought forward to begin the process of repealing and replacing the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023. Measures to modernise the Constitution will be introduced, including House of Lords reform, to remove the right of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the Lords. My ministers will strengthen the integrity of elections and encourage wide participation in the democratic process. The government will propose a modernisation committee of the House of Commons, which will be tasked with driving up standards, improving work practices and reforming procedures. My government will ensure a strong defence based on the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation's common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights and the rule of law. Its commitment to NATO will remain unshakable. It will maintain a strong armed forces, including the nuclear deterrent. To ensure that the United Kingdom's defence capabilities are matched to the changing nature of global strategic threats, my government will conduct a strategic defence review. My government will continue to give its full support to Ukraine and its people, and it will endeavour to play a leading role in providing Ukraine with a clear path to NATO membership. My government will seek to reset the relationship with European partners and work to improve the United Kingdom's trade and investment relationship with the European Union. My ministers will seek a new security pact to strengthen cooperation on the mutual threats faced by the United Kingdom and the European Union. My government will play its part in trying to secure long-term peace and security in the Middle East. It is committed to a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Later this week, my government will host the European Political Community meeting at Blenheim Palace. The Queen and I look forward to our visit to Samoa alongside the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in October and our visit to Australia. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
And there we have it, the King's Speech 2024. Well, dozens of pieces of legislation there. announced, including full support for Ukraine and its people, playing a leading role in providing Ukraine with a clear path to NATO membership. Elsewhere, a seek to reset the relationship with European partners and work to improve UK trade and investment relationships with the EU. Critics, of course, of Labour warning that would come for many, many months in advance of the election. And Bev, I'm not sure what you made of this one. Plans to halve violence against women and girls.
I'm never quite sure where that half figure comes from. I think it's sort of high risk, really, to say you're going to half at such a statistic with so many variables. I think, for me, of course, it is a brushstrokes speech. There can be very little detail in a speech like that. It is meant to lay out their ambitions. He talked about greater rights for renters, of course, landlords. That is bad news if you own a house and you rent that out. He talked about leasehold and commonhold reform. We don't quite know the detail of that. A football regulator.
Yes.
To make football to increase its sustainability. Mike Parry's joined us in the studio as well here. We've still got Rafe Haydo-Mancu, Michael Cole and Stephen Pound. Mike, what was the takeout for you from that?
Well, the football regulator's been bouncing around for years, and my argument against that has always been we do have a regulatory body. It's called the Football Association, and if they did their job properly and were strict with the way they interpret rules, you wouldn't need a football regulator. Look, the whole of the King's speech, just a few days ago, Sir Keir Starmer said, my government, you know, in the next few years will tread more lightly on your life. Are you joking? They've announced here possibly millions of new jobs in civil servant type roles. If you're pushing out devolution, if you're saying we're going to create all these new bodies all over the place, then you're expanding the state. And he said only a few weeks ago, no, we'll tread more lightly on your lives. No, you're not. I mean, just the green energies bill, that's hundreds of thousands of people are going to be involved in trying to achieve a mad target of net zero by 2030. Honestly, I've never seen a King's speech with so many bills in it, which involves so much spending, so many more people working from the state, and more freedoms being taken off the individual.
Stephen Pound?
I think you've totally misinterpreted it. Look,
no, I haven't, Stephen. I've interpreted it my way.
Mike, you've interpreted it your way, but you've not interpreted the right way or the sense.
Well, it's your way or my way. I'm sorry, you're not right necessarily.
Hang on a second. Let me just respond specifically to a couple of your points. You're talking about the transition to green energy. At the moment, we have a huge number of people employed in the fossil fuel industry. I'd rather see them actually working on green energy instead of us importing wind farms from South Korea. You're talking about...
Well, we're importing oil because Ed Miliband has now cancelled all licences in the North Sea.
He hasn't. He hasn't
new licences.
New licences.
New licences.
There's a hell of a difference. The existing ones there. But look, when you're talking about devolving powers, you're not talking about creating whole new structures all over the country. You're talking about moving civil servants either out of their jobs or out of...
Oh, that's worked well in Wales, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think Wales needs any more autonomy, considering it's the worst-run country in Europe?
Well, it's a fairly low bar, but the point being that if you've got a country which isn't well-run, you have the power to chuck them out.
No, they don't in Wales.
We are the most centralised country in Europe, and as far as I'm concerned, the more autonomy we can give to local people to make local decisions in local interest, the better.
The more bureaucracy, more civil servants...
Less bureaucracy, less control from Whitehall. No longer the man in Whitehall knowing best, but you in Epsom knowing best what's best for Epsom.
So the Senate in Wales then doesn't employ many people. It keeps employing more and more people.
No, it doesn't.
It does. And the more people it employs, the more inefficient it gets. Well, that's what the record tells us.
What do we make of this? I didn't quite get the full description, but a nod to AI, new legislation to regulate the powerful quote-unquote AI revolution.
Well, good luck with that.
There was always going to be something in there, wasn't there, about the AI revolution? Again, I think it was a brushstroke. It was a nod. Here we have the technocrat in waiting and the and him who went before. So Richardson and Keir Starmer there talking, looking very friendly to one another. You know, gone are the animosities of the run-up to the election. We've got Jeremy Hunt there in the background. You could see Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, smiling. Angela Rayner was smiling. The sense of satisfaction that they are there, that they are in power, Mike. We have to surely wish the new government well.
Well, I wish the country well, and I hope the new government does things which makes all our lives better, but frankly, I just don't get it. The number of bills introduced in the first King's speech, you'll know better than me, Stephen. Years ago, it was lucky if there were 2 bills introduced in the King's speech.
There's 35 bills in the King's speech.
Yeah.
The average used to be 25.
It is the longest ever, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's, as Stephen said, it is a very, very full King's speech, a very ambitious one. All of it, I think, without exception, had been trailed very thoroughly before this had happened. I think it's the first King's speech ever that managed to mention vapes, junk food and gender conversion therapies.
Which were, of course, Conservative policies that are now being enacted.
Indeed. But what is interesting, I mean, do people learn from the past? If they forget the past, are they bound to repeat the mistakes of the past? Because when they talk about renationalising the railways, maybe there's nobody in the government who ever remembers British Railways and British Rail, because what we have now, and I came on one of the privatised rail services this morning, it was expensive, yes, but it was 100 times better than what used to be before.
But it's not always like that. I get the train a lot. And it's 90 quid to get from the south coast to central London. A lot of the time the trains are cancelled, they're late, they don't even... You know, if they bother to tell you why they're late or they're going to be late or delayed in advance, you can make your stomach in.
Ben, you're absolutely right.
It's a disgrace.
But will renationalisation... Michael and I covered those rail strikes. We were outside the headquarters, first of all in Marylebone and then at Euston, weren't we?
Absolutely,
and they went on. And British Rail, as it existed, it shortened its name.
OK. Gentlemen, I need to interrupt you, I'm afraid. We need to bring you the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fine day out there and feeling quite warm. It's going to get a bit warmer as well over the next few days, certainly for some of us under the influence of this high pressure system. But notice there are weather fronts just creeping in towards the west. They'll bring a bit more cloud this afternoon to the west of Scotland, maybe 1 or 2 showers over the Highlands. But for most places, it's dry and fine. We had some early morning mist and some cloud is now developing. It's not blue sky everywhere, but generally sunny spells and a bit of sunshine will lift the temperatures up into the low to even mid-20s in the southeast. Could get up to 25 Celsius in the London area. A little cooler in the far northwest, and the cloud will continue to thicken across western Scotland as we go into the evening. Perhaps just a few more showers drifting in here, but for most of Scotland it is going to be a fine end to the day, with temperatures still 19-20 degrees at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Fine too in Belfast, but increasing cloud to the west of Northern Ireland. We will see a few showers just coming in here to end the day. For most of England and Wales, though, a pretty pleasant summer's evening. And it'll stay fine and dry across England and Wales overnight. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, we will see that cloud continuing to thicken up. Outbreaks of rain trickling into Northern Ireland, certainly across western Scotland, where it could turn heavy in places towards the end of the night. Some mist and fog likely across parts of England and Wales, and maybe the odd shower into West Wales. But for most, dry. Quite a warm evening, but nothing too oppressive. 14 to 16 the low in most towns and cities. A wet start then for western Scotland on Thursday. I said that rain could be heavy for a time in the morning. We'll see some showery rain across southern and eastern Scotland for a little bit of time to the middle part of the morning, and it's a dull, damp morning for Northern Ireland. But for most of England and Wales, it's another fine day, plenty of sunshine, and it is
It's our summer treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest cash prize of the year so far. With an extra £30,000 in your bank account this year, you could take the ultimate financial holiday and send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could get you those nagging home improvements done, buy that brand new car, or just enable you to kick back and relax for the rest of the year. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only.